Welcome to the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee, Tuesday, 30th of July. There are no emergency drills planned, and in the event of a fire or other emergency, you should vacate the building in an orderly manner through the nearest available exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. Can I please ask that the live stream is started and verbal confirmation provided when we are broadcasting?
Confirm, Chair, that the live stream has been started.
Thank you. So, welcome to this meeting, as I said, of Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee. Agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and also making a recording. The recording will be available via the Council's website shortly after the meeting is concluded. Other attendees are permitted to film, photograph and record our public meeting, providing it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If you do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please identify yourself so that anyone who intends to record the meeting can be made aware. So we've got some people there at the back. If you can, yeah, noted. Thank you. To ensure that the recording quality is maintained, could members speak as clearly as possible and keep background noise to a minimum? Ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent. Can I also please ask that if you are speaking, if you can please use your speaker, and when you've finished speaking, if you can turn your speaker off. Thank you. So, do we have anybody joining us remotely today? I can't see that there is. Any members of the committee or co-optees with voting rights who join the meeting remotely aren't able to vote? Well, we haven't got any, so that's not really relevant. We have a number of officers and other attendees present, and I'm going to ask people to just introduce themselves quickly because we have a new Director of Children's Services, Tina Russell, welcome, and you haven't met this committee before. And perhaps if I can just quickly run through the, there's somebody's phone. If I can run through the committee members, if we introduce ourselves and then if the officers can introduce themselves, then that would be great. I might just start with myself. I'm Tony Fagan, I'm the chair of the committee. Thank you. If we move to Liz and then if we go to Sam.
Councillor Harvey, Vice Chair of the committee.
Sam Prattley, I'm the representative from the Hereford Diocese.
Right, Councillor Dave Davis, Dindor Hill Ward.
Councillor Robert Highfield, Castle Ward.
Ben Proctor, College Ward.
And we've got this statutory. Let's go through the scrutiny officers and then down. Thank you.
Of course. I'm Daniel Webb. I'm the statutory scrutiny officer.
I'm Simon Cann. I'm the clerk of the committee.
Hi everybody. I'm Councillor Ivan Powell, Cabinet Member for Children's Services.
And hi, I'm Tina Russell. I am the Interim Director of Children's Services here now in Herefordshire. Pleased to meet you all.
Hi, Tilly Page, Complaints and Children's Rights Manager.
Good afternoon, my name's Steve Eccleston. I'm the Interim Partnership Manager for the 3 Safeguarding Child partnerships here.
That's great. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming today. So have we had any apologies for absence?
We've had apologies for absence from Councillor Frank Cornthwaite and Jan Francis, one of our co-opted members.
And Councillor Rob Owen as well, actually sent me apologies. Thank you. Any other apologies that anybody's aware of? No? Thank you. Do we have any members nominated to attend as substitutes? No?
No substitutes. Can I just go back to, I believe it's Councillor Rob Williams rather than Rob Owen.
Sorry, Rob Williams. Apologies, Rob Williams.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. we're not actually engaging much. We're trying to just get through the business of the meeting, if that's okay. There'll be an opportunity for people to ask their supplementary questions. Declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations of interest by members in respect of items on the agenda? No? Thank you. Right, in terms of the minutes, so we've been asked to approve and sign the minutes of the meeting held both on the 13th of June 2024 and on the 7th of May 2024. Has everybody read those minutes, and does anybody have any items for corrections? Okay, so the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of June 2024 and 7th of May be agreed as a correct record. Is everybody happy for me to do that? Thank you. So I'll sign the minutes after the meeting. Right, so questions from members of the public. Have we received any written questions from members of the public?
5 questions from members of the public were accepted. The questions and responses have been published as a supplement to the agenda for the meeting on the Herefordshire Council website.
Thank you. And do we have any supplementary questions?
We've received 4 supplementary questions. 2 will be asked in person and 2 have been submitted in writing.
Thank you, and thank you to the members of public for your public questions. Just to go through the protocol about public questions, that a questioner may ask 1 supplementary question. A supplementary question must be a question and not a statement, and must arise directly out of the original question or the reply. Please, if it can be no longer than 1 minute to ask. I'd just like to remind everybody that supplementary questions must not disclose confidential or exempt information, names of individuals, or provide information where they can be easily identified. Obviously, this is really important because there are a lot of vulnerable people involved in children's services. For example, individual officers or public bodies, please don't make any criminal accusations or refer to an issue which is currently the subject of a formal council complaint. I will be quite strict about this, and I do have the authority to stop the questions if this isn't adhered to, and anybody who isn't able to comply with that will be asked to return to the public gallery. I also just want to make it clear that we won't be able to give verbal answers today to supplementary questions, and supplementary questions will receive a written response. As set out in paragraph 5.8.26 of the Herefordshire Council Constitution, a written response to accepted supplementary questions will normally be provided within 10 working days. So, Clerk, could you please read out the supplementary questions that we've received, and then we'll go to the supplementary questions from the members of public in the gallery.
Thank you. The first written supplementary question was submitted by Mr. James McGowan of Webley, and it reads, "Thank you for most useful answer. You state, parental views should be recorded within an assessment or written as a separate document and placed on file, and referenced within the case file to ensure they are linked to the appropriate assessment. This is exactly what I wanted and have been trying to achieve through my understanding of your children's representations and complaints procedure. Since 20th of June, I've submitted 9 formal complaints, all on different dates, all raising new issues, all Royal Mail plough lane delivery confirmation. Not a single acknowledgement and reference have I received. I have now followed your suggestion. If you would like to provide details to the DCS and have sent Tina Russell DCS package of everything, including notice of intent to seek help from local government and social care ombudsman. Will this ensure everything's reviewed? And a written response will be provided to that question."
Thank you.
The
Thank you for
second,
that question. Yes. Okay. Second supplementary question.
the second supplementary question was submitted by Miss Megan McGowan of Webley, and it reads, "I believe you have misunderstood the question. It is about inappropriate use of multi-agency deferral forms, which was why the National Fostering Agency recording commenced October 2018. Therefore, you have not answered the question. Is it still an ongoing intention and desire of Herefordshire Council to reduce the number of inappropriate referrals and NFAs? If yes, and in 2023 alone there were 884 not progressed, including a significant number of loving families of good standing who didn't want interference in their lives from local authority. To help reduce this number, would it be a good idea to formally make social workers of all ranks aware of Right Help, Right Time guidance from Herefordshire Safeguarding Children Partnership? This contains statutory guidance for local authority intervention, and based on experience, there appears some lack of knowledge of its existence or understanding of its contents.
Thank you for that. Can we please make sure that those written responses will actually be included in the minutes of this meeting? Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Right, thank you. So if we can please have the supplementary questions from the members of the public.
One question from Miss Hannah Curry and one from Miss Maggie Steele. It's your preference as to who you...
Okay, thank you. Miss Curry, can you ask your question, please? Thank you.
Can we proceed with the question, please?
I'll ask for an update from the DCS about that, please. And if you can ask your question, please.
Can you hear me okay? Okay. Given the issues raised historically about inaccurate and false data being processed and shared with third parties, and in the past few days, Paul Walker has written personally to me to apologise for again incorrect processing of personal information in just the past 10 days, do you not think it is time to accept that the case of BT and GT, the twins of adoption, was not an isolated incident of a deliberate act to mislead, and either support a call for a public inquiry or agree that the time and resources need to be made available for the independent reviews the families were promised?
Thank you, Ms. Curry. As I said, we will make sure that there is a written response to the questions. Thank you. Can we please have the next public question from Ms. Steele? Thank you.
Is that on? Can I just say before I ask my question that it's extremely difficult for members of the public to come up here and to ask questions, and the way we're treated when we're here in this room with you is shocking. Reports presented to the committee today have not included the voice of the families affected. The corporate director, not even here, talks at paragraph 11 in her report about meetings with families to resolve issues. But ask the families and you would discover that many issues are not resolved, and they have been subjected to another 12 months of delay, distress and broken promises. Time after time, officers write about their activity, but the public are not asked to say what the impact on them is. The Independent Commission was not what families were promised, not what they wanted. It hasn't resolved issues for families with live cases, and there is little sign of improvement. In the last 18 months, the number of looked after children was reduced by just 2. The public can tell you why, but you never ask them. Dear committee, the public want to work collaboratively and positively with you to bring about change, but they cannot do that if you keep them at arm's length and allow officers to present reports on how busy they've been without cross-checking their activity against outcomes. We, the public, sit here at the back of the room, virtually silenced, apart from 1 minute per person. We want to engage positively with you. My question is this: how will you engage with the public so that you can properly scrutinise what officers are writing and distinguish between what is written to assuage you and what is really happening on the ground? And I think really you could answer that question now. It's a question to the whole committee, not to you as chair.
So thank you, Ms. Steele, for your question, and I'm sure the whole committee has heard it, and we will discuss your question, and we appreciate the views that you've voiced about that, and we will absolutely consider that. You will also get a written response in terms of the how Children's Services and the partnership aim to actually hear the voices of those families. Thank you for your question. I did answer your question. Thank you. So, thank you to members of the public for your questions. I realise it is difficult to come up and ask your public questions, but we do actually want to hear what you have to say. If we can move to the substantive item on the agenda, which is the complaints system, and we've got Tilly Page here. Tilly, thank you for your report and for your work on this. If you could actually please take us through a sort of synopsis of the report, and we can start on the questions from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The report focuses on the last municipal year, so from April 23 through to March 24. We look at the corporate complaints as well as the statutory children's complaints and representations that were made to the local authority. The report shows the increase in complaints that have been received, but also the increase in responses and the response times to those complaints by the local authority. It also shows a decrease in the escalations to stage 2 and 3 of the statutory procedure. One thing I did want to highlight, and it's a math error on my end, it was 77% of complaints that were resolved at stage 1, not 81, and I do apologise for that. That's my math error. The report also shows the number of referrals that were submitted to the local government ombudsman, and the whole report looks at not just the last year, but it compares it to the previous 5 years, since children's complaints were moved into the corporate service rather than sitting within Children's Services. In the report, it does say that 56 complaints were submitted to the ombudsman. That figure is correct, but that's complaints for the whole council. Those that relate to Children's Services, there were 12 that were submitted. 7 of those were fully investigated, and on top of that, 4 related to education services. So just to clarify that. I wanted to further clarify where we break down types of complaints. I think the 4 categories are fairly self-explanatory, but service failure could be anything that the service have agreed to do but have not followed up through. So that could be a phone call, agreeing to follow up with a contact or a phone call or an email. They've agreed an action and haven't followed through with that. That's a service failure. So it isn't always as large as it sounds. The other thing I just wanted to highlight was the factors causing escalation to complaint. I note there are 6 or 7 reasons I've put in there. That's not an exhausted list, but they're the common reasons that we get for escalation. I think it's really key to highlight that, yes, we do have a persistent increase in complaints. We do have an effective complaints procedure, but something we're continuing to develop and improve on is how we're responding to those complaints, and that's something that both my service and Children's Services will continue to work on and improve with. So although we've embedded a very effective complaints procedure, we can't always control the responses that are received, but that's something that we will continue to work on and continue to improve. But the improvements with the response times and responding to complaints within timescales has significantly improved in the last 12 months. Okay, thank you, Tilly. I just sort of want to remind everyone why we brought this to the committee. So obviously this was raised by the Commissioner, Elena Brazil, and looking at complaints, she said that there were common themes which relate to poor communication, changes in social workers, and agreed plans not being implemented. She said there's a little evidence of a systematic approach to learning lessons from complaints and using those to improve practice.
So I think that is absolutely key to certainly the questions that the committee have raised is how do we know, and this may not be a question for you, this may well be a question for the director, how do we know that the complaints that we're receiving are actually informing practice? How do we know that they're going to improve practice? Obviously, we would need some data to support that, but I think that that's absolutely crucial, because the complaint system effectively is our lens into what families are experiencing. And I think for elected members, it's really important to know that we have a robust system in place, so that when we get approaches from members of the public or people who feel that they have not had a fair process, we know that we have a system in place that we can trust. So it's really the question around that. It is an important aspect, certainly from the local authority point of view, and then later we'll look at that in terms of the actual partnership. But I wondered, Tina, if you wanted to respond, or Tilly, who maybe both of you.
I can definitely answer that in part, and then perhaps it would be a joint answer that would be most appropriate. So in regards to learning, when a complaint is assigned to an investigating officer within the local authority, it's expected that they would complete what we call a lessons learned template, and that's sent back to my service, and we collate all of that learning. The responsibility to embed that learning falls within the service area the complaint has been made about, but the expectation is that there is always learning to be taken from a complaint that is submitted. When a complaint is escalated to stage 2 or 3 of the statutory process, independent investigating officers will make recommendations that would relate either to the complaints process but also to children's services and how we can continue to improve. That work is, I was previously working with Gail, but we'll now be working with Tina to make sure that those recommendations are taken forward to continue to improve the practice and to make sure that any changes that have been recommended are embedded in the practices of social workers, team managers and everybody involved.
Thanks, Tilly. So yeah, as Tilly said, there is the learning log. I think what we need to do is we need to get better at making sure that we collate those learning logs. They can range from anything to the development of a new practice standard or the change of a policy, that we will then implement across the service, and then we would be able to, and we do, to undertake targeted audits and looking at compliance. So making sure that we can provide the committee with the information of the changes and the developments that have been made, and then any audit compliance activity I think will be helpful. Sometimes the learning log will be a learning issue for an individual, or it might be for a team area. Obviously, if it relates to an individual, that's something that we can't publicly report, but we can we do manage within the service in terms of individuals that might have had a learning development. We might send people on training courses for different things, and we can include that in the learning log. But for the individual, there may be a performance issue that's been taken on board, and that is something that we would just need to manage as a service. I think you're right, keeping information on the data is always important. I do think, though, that we also need to get much better on recording and sharing the data on our compliments, because that is the other part of the insurance that you will get as a committee when you see differences in practice. So one of the things I just came to this week, I mean, this is my 4th week in service, but I just wanted to share these couple of things. We have within the service something that's called shout outs, so it's compliments and good practice. And at the moment they include internal cross-service and partners compliments, but they also include positive feedback that we've had from children, young people and parents. And I've just got 2 that came through in the June. This is a monthly report that came through in the June report. This came through in June and was feedback for a family support worker, Richard, and it came from a parent and said, Mum shared that Richard was brilliant. The children felt comfortable, he made them laugh and they enjoyed his visits. They have had 2 social workers who they really struggled with prior to Richard working with them. So obviously there's a concern there in terms of the prior, but I chose that, it came in June, but it is a reflection on the more current recent practice that that family was experiencing. The second one is for a social worker who sits within the court and child protection teams. The social worker now has been really supportive. However, Mum does not feel that this was the same with her previous social worker. Mum shared that she had a really good relationship with this social worker and feels that he does listen. Her daughter suffers with anxiety and is careful who she talks to. However, she is open with this social worker. She shares her thoughts and she's willing to meet with him alone. This has been a real positive difference for all the children, and I know he will listen to them and to me and help. This social worker not only listens, but he acts. He gives ideas about how to approach situations to make it easier. And if my daughter is struggling in school, he will link him with the school. This means all professionals are working together and listen to the views of the children. And this mum said she didn't think there was anything better. This was as part of a service user feedback that we did. This mum said she didn't think there was anything better that the social worker could have done. So you having sight also of those compliments, this was just June's, and we're in the process now of developing a tracker to incorporate the compliments within the complaints report so that you do see that. And that second reference I made there to the service user feedback, that is something that we are developing as part of our phase 2 plan to make sure that we are asking more parents more frequently and through a range of mechanisms to tell us what the experience that they and their children are having here and now in terms of current practice. And that's part of our improvement plan.
Thank you. Councillor Hayfield.
Yeah, I'm very encouraged with those answers. What I'd like to know is that if a complaint results in a change of procedure or training or something, does feedback about that go back to the original complainant to satisfy them that actual action has been taken as a result of their complaint?
Yeah, as an outcome to the complaint, there would be recommendations for actions that are taken forward, so they would know about that when they get the outcome from the stage 1 or the stage 2.
Councillor Harvey, did you have a question?
Yes, I mean, as Councillor Highfield has said, it's really interesting to have you read those 2 example compliments, and it's great to hear that the service is receiving feedback like that. And, you know, if as a committee we can get to receive that, that's going to be really helpful. I think my observation would be that even having this as an agenda item before us and having a report written about the complaints side of the coin, we haven't had visibility in terms of complaints of any similar detail associated with the complaint side of things. So great to hear the compliment, but really what all we've had is statistics.
So I think what Tilly's report's tried to do is to give you the overview, because when the complaints come in, they will be categorised in whether this is a complaint about a staff member's attitude or a complaint about a failure to deliver a service or a complaint about a decision that the parents disagreed with. And so I think that's what Tilly's tried to do and hasn't given examples within that, but that's not difficult for us to do. One of the things that we're also doing, as Tilly said, you know, there has been developments around the complaint processes, but we do want to make it even better. We can always improve these things. And so part, again, of the Phase 2 improvement plan is for us to work with Leeds and myself to, again, look at the process to see if we can make it even better. And things like that, for me, are things like making sure that we do speak to the complainants at the beginning of a complaint and that we then audit to make sure that that is taking place. One of the things that I also introduced in my previous authority was for an independent person to even undertake the investigation at stage 1. And I think that was helpful for the parents and the children themselves to be able to talk to somebody at the beginning of their complaint who was going to investigate, but it wasn't the case responsible manager. So I think there are things that we can develop. even further to help give the family a better experience and also to give you information. So that's part of our improvement plan. We can certainly come back to scrutiny, include it in the programme perhaps towards the end of the year, so that we can come back with what's happened at three quarters of this year, what's happened with that next phase of development, and we can bring it alongside some compliments as well.
Yes, I think if we can please have that, if we can note that and make sure that we have that. Now, I can see, Sam Pratley, that you have a question. I just wanted to add to that. Within the report, it says that we need to build on strong involvement from local leaders, etc., that Leeds will work with the complaints team to agree this revised approach. So I assume that this work has already started and that effectively we can have sight of it by the end of the year. Is that right?
Yesterday we had our second meeting with Leeds about how we can continue to improve the complaints procedure, both corporately and within children's services. So that work is being undertaken, so we can, as Tina said, bring that back to you at the end of the year.
Okay, thank you. And just following on from that, possibly one of the ways that scrutiny can contribute to that is that if we can actually have an informal session with some families and actually get that feedback from families that we can feed into that process, because I think what's very clear is that we need to make sure that throughout this whole process that there is input from young people, children and families. So if that's okay, if we can possibly put that down as a recommendation for the end. Sam.
Yeah, thank you. I was pleased to hear that you want to meet with complainants right at the beginning. I've seen a lot of historical correspondence that would indicate either a failure to address the actual complaint or a complete failure to understand what the complaint is about. And it then creates an enormous amount of dialogue that goes backwards and forwards, and each response reveals new information or new problems that then causes the complainant to come back again. What else are you doing to try and address this culture of failing to address the actual complaint?
I think that's right, that at the beginning of the complaint, first the complaints team will receive the complaint, and I'm sure Tilly will correct me, but my experience is always that the complaints team will make sure that they have recorded and got the accuracy of what the parent or the young person wants to complain about. But the additional value of that investigator meeting with the person to say, this is what I understand, and then agreeing in writing what it is, what the scope is, what the issues are. And the other thing I think is really important is having that conversation at the beginning about what outcomes the parent or the child or the young person is seeking through making a complaint, because it is important that we are clear about what the complaints process can and also what it can't achieve. And I think so making sure that we're clear, as you say, on what the issue is, but also what is the outcome that the parent is seeking to achieve is really important. As Tilly's report explains, there are two processes. There is a children's statutory complaints process and there is the corporate complaints process. And one of them has the 3 stages. And parents can, if they're not happy with what the report completes at stage 2, they can move to stage 1, they can move to stage 2, and then they can move to stage 3. And it concerns me if we've not had that open conversation about what the complaint process can achieve. And we need to make it clear that if you're progressing to stage 2, what stage 2 can and can't achieve, and what stage 3 can and can't achieve, so that we're not setting up a process and a bureaucracy that is leading families to believe something is going to be achieved that won't be achieved. And I would like to see many complaints resolved at stage 1. I think, as Tilly's report says, 100 complaints in children's services and 102 in corporate, and we would want to see that reduced. But we will always get some complaints. We can always do things differently. I think it's important to understand the data when complaints are upheld as a service. If your complaint is that you didn't feel listened to, for example, or you didn't think communication was good. In my experience, I know sometimes what you think appropriate levels of communication are and what I think as the officer is or the worker is appropriate communications might be different. And so very often at complaints we will, as the professional agency, take that step down and acknowledge that your complaint is upheld because that's what you felt. You wanted communication weekly, daily, but that was something that we can't offer. So we will uphold that we needed to be clearer about what communication, what proportionate and realistic communication, for example, we could offer. But those 200 complaints over those two processes, we want to have less than that. We want to resolve more at stage one. But I do think it is helpful for the committee to remember that last year, for example, the service undertook approximately just shy of 1,500 brand new social work assessments. And also within that same year, we were working with 1,200 children in need, where we were working with the family to try and help that parent resolve issues and challenges that they were experiencing as a parent that was affecting their parenting or was affecting their children, and there were concerns that they had about their children. In addition to that, we were working with 300 children who had got children with disabilities, 200 children who were subject to child protection plans, 380 children who were children in care, and 400 care leavers. So whilst 200 is too many, and as I said, we want to resolve that, we do need to see that in the context is that at any one time we have a service that's working with over 4,000 different children. And that's important to understand that data, I think, in that context.
Apologies, but actually this isn't an interactive meeting with the members of the public, and please can I ask you to keep your comments to yourself, otherwise I'm going to have to ask you to leave the room because it's incredibly distracting. If you do have things to say, please speak to me afterwards, but please. Right, Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. We're talking a lot about the parent who's got a problem, a complaint. There are numerous adoptive parents who have got complaints over the years, but don't feel that they can actually make a complaint. Is there any way that there's a feedback registration or whatever that they can actually fill out how they feel in the year? Has anybody been listening to them? I know it's very, very difficult because I know parents that feel that if they make a complaint, then it may fall back on them, that they may be sent to Coventry, as it were, the old saying. So there is that fear going on, which is not good for that adoptive parent, in my opinion.
So once a parent or a person has adopted a child, they are their legal parent. So they have the same rights to make a complaint through the process as everybody else does. They don't have to do something different just because they've adopted their child. The complaints process is there for everybody to use. We have outside of the complaints process a number, if you're working with a family to raise your concern, we have the escalation. If you're not confident in your worker, you can raise it with their manager. If you're not confident in the manager, you can raise it with their senior manager. And many things do get resolved in this way. They are all informal resolutions in terms of the way we work with families that are not incorporated in the complaints data.
Sorry, can I just follow on from that? In my area, I've discovered that we've got some adopted parents, but there's no sort of group that they can, support group, that they can actually meet and talk about some problems. Because we all know that when we've been going through difficult times in our lives, going to a support group has been very beneficial. Is this something that has used to happen and now doesn't happen, do you think?
I'm not sure how they're set up locally, but Herefordshire are part of ACE, Adoption Central England, and there are 5 local authorities, and they run support groups and information groups for all adoptive parents across the local authorities.
Thank you. So there'd be no problem in our local area, somebody starting up a support group?
No, not at all.
The Data Protection Act, we as a councillor, in my understanding is that we're not told who is an adoptive parent. So that's quite a difficult hurdle to get over. If we really want to communicate with a parent, how do we know who they are? I just have to say to someone, do you know anybody who is adopting children? Which is...
I think what I would say is that we don't share information about who is or isn't an adoptive parent for their rights of privacy. And that's appropriate that we don't. My advice is that you can send something out to all parents and say, if you are an adoptive parent, because they know who they are, and they will respond if they want to.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. Councillor Highfield, did you have a question? Oh, was it Councillor Proctor first? Sorry, Councillor Proctor and then Councillor Highfield.
I'd like to explore a bit more about the, I guess, the culture around handling complaints within children's services. Maybe starting by, I think we accept that the complaints process could be better. So what should we expect if we were dealing with complaints at Leeds standard as an outstanding authority? What should we expect from our complaints process? How would Councillor Powell, how would we know that it was good, that it was having an impact?
I think that's actually a real interesting question, and it's a real challenge for us, as I said. One of the best ways of understanding that your complaints process is working well is that your complaints are reducing, and that they are issues and concerns that families have or children have are raised and spoken to with their workers as part of everyday work, but they're all resolved as informal. The challenge is then adding a level of workload and bureaucracy for staff to have to keep recording all of the informal complaints and the informal resolutions when we've got very, very busy staff. Overall, you would see a reduction and then stabilising of complaints. I'm certainly not going to say that you will see a service that doesn't have complaints. There are breakdowns that we can do in terms of service areas for us to understand it better. So are the majority of complaints coming in, for example, in our children in care teams, or are they coming in our MASH teams or our assessment teams? We can understand that. We can share that with you in terms of what we do and change of practice. And as I say, through the compliments as well, whether or not we can build something in that asks parents and children, young people at the end of a complaints process, whether they feel that it has been dealt with satisfactorily. We don't formally ask that question. We, by default, know that if they don't progress to stage 2, then they are satisfied with the resolution and the investigation that's happened at stage 1, because they have the automatic right to go to stage 2 if they're not happy. So that in itself tells you the percentage that don't go on to stage 2. They're people that have felt that they needed to make a complaint, they've made it, and they're happy with the outcome. So they're the kind of things I think that we would try and triangulate to give you that picture.
Thank you. Though I'd just like to challenge the idea that automatically, if nobody goes on to stage 2, it means that they're satisfied at stage 1. So I have raised complaints, not with children's services, where I wasn't satisfied with the answer, but because I didn't feel that I would get anything by going any further, I've dropped it there, and I'm trying to get, I think, to an understanding of how we understand or the culture of how people treat complaints. So I think the situation that you described, where things are raised informally and they're kind of taken as feedback and they're resolved, that sounds great. It comes up in the other review, but the Leeds, having looked at case review and complaints, have suggested that at times where our staff are not treating complaints as families recognising their rights and raising rightful criticism, but as troublemakers. Leeds have also said that we're not consistently adopting a restorative practice approach, and I'd like to understand how we can know these, how we can be confident that the changes that we're putting in are actually changing these practices, because these are quite sort of cultural. They're not things that you can easily measure with numbers.
I think the culture of an organisation is the people. I don't personally think that you can send somebody on a training course to develop a culture that you want to develop in your organisation. It is who we are, it's the way we speak, it's the way we interact, it's who we are. In terms of the assurances and around the process, I'm not sure I can add anything that I've already said around the range of things that we can do about making sure that the process is in there, the practice standard is in there, meeting the people at the beginning. I agree with your point that some people don't go on to stage 2 because they think it's not worth it. But actually, I think sometimes in that is that conversation around what is it that you want to achieve by stage 2, but also for many, the issues have been resolved in stage 1, and so they don't go on to stage 2 because actually what they were unhappy about has been resolved. So that combination of having a process, having an expectation of that's the way we work, doing some auditing to make sure that that's the way we work, asking people at the end of using a process whether they felt satisfied with the process, as well as acknowledging whether or not they do or don't progress to stage 2, adding in the complements. All of those things are the things that I've said and that I think, you know, bring perhaps a wider picture to try and give you some assurances.
And I think that coming before us, the collation of complaints, etc., will actually be really helpful in identifying that. Tilly, you wanted to come in there.
I just wanted to offer some reassurance that complaints aren't closed without having any correspondence with the complainant. So yes, we have statutory timescales for complainants to come back to us, but we do make sure that we send not just one email, we'll try a phone call, we will follow up with 2 or 3 emails to ask them if they are satisfied with the response or if there's anything else we can do to resolve that for them. If we don't hear from them within a period of time, that's when we close the complaint. But I didn't want the committee to think that we just close a complaint because we've not heard from them whether they are or aren't satisfied. We do that follow-up with them.
Thank you, Tilly. One of the points that Tina made was actually that we would see a drop in complaints, and I think that in an ideal world where restorative practice had actually really embedded itself in the system and we wouldn't have as many complaints. But Tilly, you said when we had our briefing about the increase in the number of complaints, which we've seen, and you felt that was actually a positive thing. And I wonder if you can just explain why, because it has increased significantly.
Yeah, absolutely. I did say in the briefing that I do think it's a positive, and it's a conversation had with Darryl and a conversation I'll continue to have with Tina. I think we've done a lot of work the last 18 months to 2 years on embedding an effective complaints procedure. Now, I'm not under any illusion that we are perfect in how we're handling our complaints at the moment, but we are continuing to improve, and that work with Leeds is being undertaken. I think the increase for me indicates that some, not all, but some of our children, young people and families feel like they can come and make a complaint, and that we will try to resolve that for them, and we will listen to them and hear their concerns and work with them. Now, whether that is at stage 1, which is the local resolution, or whether we skip stage 1 and we go straight to stage 2 and we look at independently investigating the concerns they've raised, either way, we are trying to reassure them that the complaints procedure is taken very seriously at the council now, and that we will work with them. I think what Tina's point earlier of trying to understand what their desired outcomes is really key at that early stage. So using and utilising the complaints procedure effectively to get the outcome for the parents, for the families, for the children, so that they are using the right process and that we can fully support them. So I think there has been an increase because it's more accessible. We've changed the website. The complaints team is a team of permanent members of staff. We've made sure that the multitude of email addresses that were available to come through to the complaints line have all been ceased. So everything just comes through to complaints at Herefordshire now. And separating the complaints service from the access to information service, that's something we did 18 months ago. So the complaints is a service in its own right. It no longer sits under what was called access to information. So subject access requests, FOIs, EIRs and complaints were being dealt with by one service. The complaints is a service in its own right. So I think the increase, just for me, it does indicate that the families are listening to us, and some of the feedback we have had from our families is that they're encouraging other families to complain because the system has changed. And I know we're on a long journey to make sure that that all our families are reassured that they can make a complaint and it will be looked at effectively. And I do think we will at some point see a decrease. But for me, the increase in complaints is a positive, because if we can work with our families to resolve the concerns they've got, whether they are current or historic, because we have looked at a lot of historic complaints in the last 18 months, that we will do that and we will work with them, and we want them to be part of that improvement journey that we are going on.
Thank you. If I can refer to the historic complaints, because obviously that again was something that the Commissioner raised, resolve as far as possible all outstanding historic complaints. I know that as councillors we are often contacted about the historic complaints, and that some people may feel that things have been resolved. For some people that is not the case. But I wonder if we could just have an update on the historic complaints, and you know, when can we expect to draw a line under those historic complaints?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I came on board in September 22, as you say, there were a lot of outstanding historic complaints. It was agreed with the previous corporate director that rather than try for the service to try and manage the concerns, that the families would be offered the option to go through the complaints procedure. Not all of the families have decided to do that, which I completely understand and respect, because of the concerns they had about how complaints have previously been handled. What we continue to try to do is work with our families so that we offer them that reassurance that the procedure is different. We are following the statutory guidance, the Getting the Best from Complaints guidance, and we are looking at everything effectively, as I say, whether that is locally and the local authority looking at it, or we commission somebody independent to look at the concerns that they've got. We have been able to resolve a lot of the historic complaints that were outstanding. I think those that perhaps are still outstanding have not utilised the complaints procedure, and I don't want any family to feel like they can't come to us and make a complaint because of the concerns they've got. But equally, I don't want to push them into using a procedure they may not feel comfortable or confident with using, but I want to continue to work with our families so they can reassure other families that the procedure is fit for purpose now, it does work, it is effective. And should they wish to raise concerns, then they can come to us, and there's an open door. And I've met with a family this morning. I'll more than happily meet with families to take their statement of complaint, as I think Sam said earlier, to really understand what that complaint is. So we do have those face-to-face meetings with children, young people, families, parents, foster carers, anybody wanting to make a complaint on behalf of the child in receipt of children's services. Either I will meet with them or a member of the team.
Thanks, Tilly. I do think it's important to say the last part of your question is when will we draw that line? And that is a really important point. This is not an open door for people to come in with a complaint that dates back years and years and years, partly because you know, we're not able to investigate to the detail of, particularly if it's a staff attitude issue or it's a, you know, if it's a decision issue. We need to understand what is it that the complainant wants as an outcome. If it's a decision issue that can't be overturned now, there's no point in us trying to take people through a historic complaint. If it's a staff attitude issue, the staff, whether the staff are here or not, going back through years and years of records is not going to add value. We need to concentrate now, our staff and our resources, on the experiences people are having now and where those people are still experiencing concerns. As Tilly says, there's some people that have used the complaints process. Some of that is not completed. And there's some of those still in the system that we will offer that completion to. But I just think it's important that we are clear. It's not an open door at any point in time. If you had a problem with Herefordshire Children's Services, you can come and raise a complaint now. There is a timescale for when somebody needs to raise a complaint within. And we do need to move to that position.
Councillor Hayfield, Councillor Davis after. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. A couple of observations, and one about our audience. Perhaps in future we could give them a written guideline as to how these meetings have to be conducted, because they don't know and they're passionate about what's going on. So that might help in future, just as an observation. And something that Tina said, would it not be the case that having an extremely efficient and well-run complaint system may actually increase the number of complaints because people feel confident that they'll be dealt with properly, whereas a reduction in the complaints may well be an indication that our overall service is better and that we're not creating the circumstances where people need to complain. That's pretty much an observation. The question I have is the speed with which things are dealt with. You're probably aware that the Children's Commissioner criticised us, not so much for what we were doing, but how fast we were doing it in the overall programme. And as far as complaints are concerned, because what we're talking about today, are we happy that the speed with which we are able to process complaints to whatever stage they go and resolve them if it's possible to resolve, are we happy with the time it's taking us, or could we do better without losing the quality?
As I say, I think there's room for improvement. I think the possibly no, because my network's gone down.
I did notice that the data on timeliness wasn't in the report, but Tilly did say in her verbal presentation of the report that the timeliness of completing the complaint investigations within 10 and within 20 working days has improved. And it is also true that any local authority whose children's services are judged as inadequate will go through a journey of a rise in complaints to a peak. And what I would hope to see now in Herefordshire, that we start to go down from that peak where people have, as Tilly's described and you've described, felt more confident that they want to raise their issues, have been listened to, have registered complaints, have been investigated. All of those things mean complaints go up, but I would like to see us now move down so that we are moving. We're showing a downward trend in the number of complaints received and the number that are progressing to stage 2. Because as I said, you will always have some level of complaints in organisational services.
Yeah, but that would be a reflection of the quality of the overall service, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Are personality clashes seen as a complaint?
It's not a category, but it is definitely something that will come out and be recorded as staff attitude and behaviour. That's generally what might be classed as if you as the parent or the young person have felt that you have not got on with that worker, you're likely to experience their personality or their approach or the way that they talk to you, etc., as difficult or challenging. And so if you were to make that complaint, that would be classed as staff attitude and behaviour.
Sorry, thank you. And how would that be resolved?
Well, that's kind of what I was describing earlier, that sometimes we just need to reflect on that and acknowledge that. And as the professional, we would say, that wasn't my intention, but I acknowledge that you experienced it like that, and reflect on that as an individual. My manager would then reflect on that with me in terms of, well, actually this parent found that you were, whatever, that you weren't easy to talk to, or that you were, and the worker may well say, well, I felt that I was just being direct and honest about what it was I needed to say. So that conversation will take place with that worker and that manager. That manager will then be able to constantly keep an eye on whether or not other service users, other children, other parents make that complaint about that particular member of staff. So we monitor right from an individual level to a team level in terms of culture, that the way that we lead as teams, the way that we deal with people. MASH, for example, and the assessment teams, you've had less time to build up a relationship with a person. You're more likely to be going out and having a conversation with a parent and carer that they are anxious about, they're unhappy about, because that's that front end of, we've come to do an assessment about your child because we've got concerns about your parenting. You would expect more complaints around that part of the service than somewhere where a worker's had an opportunity to build a relationship. So those are the kinds of nuances that we look at in detail to really understand, are we improving as services? That's the detail that we'll be able to perhaps shed a bit more light on when we come back towards the end of the year.
Chair, just to come back on that one, how easy is it to change social workers? You know, do you change them around if this sort of thing goes on? Because if a family complains and they say, I don't want to see that person.
If a family requests a change of social worker, we would look at the relationship that worker had with the child first and foremost. We do sometimes get complaints from parents. They want a change of social worker, but actually the child is engaged well and has got no concerns about that. So we would not change the social worker. We would always go with what was in the interest of the child. However, it is absolutely true that we will get the best working relationship if we've got a social worker that the parents feel that they are getting along with. So we may absolutely change the social worker in some cases, but it wouldn't be true to say that we would change it automatically in all cases because a parent requested it.
Sam.
Thank you. So there's a pattern of very positive progress reports that we hear at Scrutiny, and that's great to hear. After the meeting, we then get contacted, some of us get contacted, as the chair said, by multiple members of the public saying, what you've been told isn't the full picture, it isn't accurate, it isn't true. As members of the committee, when we then try to triangulate to say, can I pick this up, can I ask questions, we're either hit with a wall of data protection, we can't talk to you, or we're reminded that our role in scrutiny is not to get involved in the detail. And it often means that we're left with a very unsatisfactory feeling of never really being sure who to believe and what to believe. How do we change that culture so that we can effectively check that what we're being told by officers is the same as what the public would reflect, and that we can then ask the right sorts of questions? It just feels really difficult to know how to help, how to change things.
I think you have to develop your confidence and assurances in the processes. You know, the reason that we won't give you detail and do an investigation into something that somebody's raised with you is because that's a duplication for the service. We would never stop. You know, we have to say that person has been told the complaints process. They are able to make a complaint through the process. We can do the development, as we said, of the processes so that that's got an independent scrutiny, it's got an independent eye. We can do those processes. But we can't duplicate and do multiple investigations here while a complaint is also going across here. That's duplication of work for us. So it is about the way that scrutiny runs. It's about public being able to participate. It is about, you know, us answering those questions. It is about you asking for different areas to be scrutinised in more detail and to come back with. It's a much bigger process that we can only offer some confidence, for you to have some confidence in the processes outside of getting involved in individual cases.
And I think, sadly, you're inheriting a situation where a lot of confidence has been lost over a long period of time, which is why, you know, the MPs in Hustings are talking about calling for a public inquiry, because in the way that they talk, they feel that there's a loss of confidence and that's what's required. And yeah, I'm sorry, that's a statement, nothing else, but that's the problem. And that's what the members of the public are feeling when they're engaging in the complaints process. And you know,
yeah, I appreciate that, but I would also say that we have to always remember that we have to keep that in context. That's in context of the 4,000 children we're working with at any one time. That's in the context of the, I don't know off the top of my head, so apologies, but however many counsellors you've got within Herefordshire. You know, there isn't a 4,000 children complaining or their parents complaining. There aren't all of the counsellors calling for public inquiries. We have to get the information to you, we have to get the balanced information to you as a scrutiny committee so that you can, as you say, try and triangulate what's actually happening. And as I said at the beginning, you know, one of the key things for me in the improvement plan in phase 2 is that we go out and we reach out to many, many more children, young people, their parents and their carers, so that we can get that proactive feedback, not waiting for complaints, not waiting for compliments, but that proactive feedback at the end of an assessment, at the end of an intervention, at the end of a conference, a child protection meeting. Those are the kind of places that we're going to be getting the opportunity for the here and now. Tell us how you've just found that meeting. Tell us how you've just found that assessment experience. And within that, we also have to remember that the majority of the processes that we as a local authority children's service deliver are multi-agency processes. And so through the Safeguarding Partnership, we're also committed to asking parents and children to tell us how they've experienced the partnership working as well. Very often you will find that social workers are the voice of the partnership when it's a negative message around child protection or removal of children. They are the most draconian things that we sometimes have to do as we undertake our duty to protect, but it is the last thing that we want to do. But making sure that parents, and as I say, and young people have the opportunity to talk to us about how they're experiencing the multi-agency partnership working is also important.
Thank you. And I think that the issue of the partnership, which we will pick up alongside the Families Commission, is an important one, because within that complaints comes up sort of quite emphatically. Councillor Proctor, did you have a question?
A couple of, I guess, data-related questions. I'm often asking data-related questions. So the first one, which relates to something you said there, is what do we know about who isn't complaining? So are there people from particular ethnic backgrounds who are much less likely to complain? Are there children in particular parts of the system are less likely to complain? And that would be question one. And then the question, it might be they're not complaining because that bit of the system is working fantastically, or it might be they might not be complaining because we haven't put the system in place to encourage them to complain. So do we do that analysis?
So I'm going to let Tilly answer the question in terms of what we collate currently about the complainant in terms of details. It will always be voluntary. That's an important thing to say. So the questions that we will ask will be voluntary of the complainant. But that is something that I know I want to look at as well in terms of the development of our services. But Tilly will be able to give you an answer on what it is we currently collate.
So the only information we collate about the complainant is, firstly, what they're willing to provide us, but the only thing we specifically ask is what their involvement is with the child. So we don't ask anything about gender, ethnic background, anything like that, unless they are willingly volunteer it. I have had that conversation with the equality officer as to whether that's something that needs to be included on the complaints form. She's of the view that if they would like to provide that information to us, they can, but it's not something that's relevant to anybody making a complaint, and we wouldn't want to put anybody off by asking them to complete a form at the same time as making a complaint, because making a complaint can be hard enough as it is. So the data we have around those protected characteristics is very limited. But as I say, it is something I've explored, and it's something I've discussed with our equality officer, and we're both of the same view that to include that may be quite intimidating when a complaints process and procedure is already quite challenging.
So that makes sense, but it does also mean that we don't know if there are particular groups of people who are shut out of the complaints process for whatever reason, and so there might be other ways that we could explore that through occasional surveys, or but it feels like it is something we should try and seek to understand, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm happy to take that forward as a recommendation. It's a further conversation I can have with our equality officer as to whether we could do a survey, or if there's something else we can look at as to whether we are getting complaints from significant specific groups of people.
I think actually it's something that, rather than it being a separate recommendation, it's something that we'll incorporate into the review of our processes in how we are advertising the ability to make complaints and the data we're collecting and the work that we do over this next few months.
Thank you. And I think also one of the important areas is to look at, which you probably did mention, but to look at specific service areas, so or specific teams. You know, if there's a kind of continual complaint about a specific team, what is happening within that team would be quite helpful. Very conscious, I didn't actually set out my timing schedule at the beginning of the meeting, and I was hoping to draw this particular matter to a close at 3:15, which is in 5 minutes' time. So we've got another question from Councillor Harvey. Just if I could quickly ask before Councillor Harvey comes in, the issue of historic complaints. That I know that there are families who have been to multiple directors of service in this authority with some of their historic complaints, and those complaints have not been resolved. Now, I'm very conscious, Tina, I'm just putting the responsibility on your shoulders, but that you are an interim director of the service, and that if we are going to draw a line under the historic complaints, do we have a timescale to do that? Can we expect to do that while you are a director here, given that families will come to you and have to repeat the trauma that they've been through, and then potentially you will leave and we'll get a new director and they will have to repeat that process again? And how do we stop that happening?
So, whilst I'm an interim director here, I am your full-time director here, and I'm fully committed. It isn't about the parents repeating to me. I equally I'm not going to repeat what my predecessors have done. The issue for us is to find out what is the outcome that the complainants, be they historical or current, want to achieve, and thus to then have the honest conversation with them about whether that's an achievable outcome or not. If we're looking, or if your scrutiny are imagining that we'll have a satisfactory outcome reported by every individual parent that has made a historical complaint, I suspect that you're going to be disappointed, because they will not all resolve, because we cannot meet the outcome that all of the parents want. What I will be making sure is that I understand, for those that are open, what is the outcome that they are seeking? Are they in the right process that can even begin to achieve that outcome? So a best example I would give you is that if they're looking for a financial human rights claim against the local authority as an outcome to their complaint, then they need to be in the formal complaints process in order to do that. That's not a restorative conversation about you reflect and I reflect and we both reflect together on what we might have done differently. It is a formal process. So for those that are outstanding, I'm not going to duplicate. I'm not going to ask those families to duplicate what it is they're doing. My focus of attention will be on what is it that they are seeking as an outcome, and to make sure that they're in due process. Will I complete those before I finish next March? I absolutely hope so. That would be my intention. If I don't for any reason, then obviously I will make sure that wherever we're at will be handed over, but with a very clear guideline around what it is that's outstanding, so that somebody doesn't come in and think that they're going to duplicate anything that I've done.
Thank you. And if we can possibly have an update on that when we have the update on the complaint system. It was Councillor Harvey and then Councillor Davis.
Thank you. I've got 2 or 3 questions, but they kind of link together and follow on from one another. I think just to be clear, the data that we have in this report spans across the time that we've actually changed slightly how we're handling complaints in the children's area. So, Tilly, if I understand correctly, you joined us in September 2022, so we've got about 18 months worth of operating the complaints procedure from within corporate services. And prior to that, how were the complaints being dealt with? Just so we can all be clear about that.
So as I mentioned earlier, the complaint service was sitting with the access to information service. There was a complaints manager, and there were processes that should have been followed. Prior to me, there were 2 complaints managers who left quite quickly, and then the responsibility fell to the head of information compliance and equality at the time. Excuse me, sorry. I have data from the previous years that we can share with you, so you can see in data terms how things have changed and improved. A lot of complaints were being dealt with corporately rather than through the statutory process, so that's a significant change that we have made in the last 18 months, and that has come with learning, both in corporate services but also in children's services, that we all undertake complaint handling training so we know what should and shouldn't be processed through the statutory process now. It wouldn't be fair for me to speak on practice that happened before I was here, but my understanding was there was not the right level of learning about which process should be followed when a complaint was submitted, and that learning is now embedded.
Okay, that's helpful. And we have 2 distinct processes, one of which is statutory, which is the one that's dedicated to children's, and the other one we refer to as corporate, where you're basically complaining to the council about itself rather than children's services. Okay, that's useful to know. Looking at the data in your report specific to 2023-24, and looking at the section where you talk about the complaints that went to the local government ombudsman, I'm pleased that you clarified what appeared to be an eye-popping number of complaints that suddenly appeared last year, and that's actually for the whole council and not just for children's. And I think that's really helpful because it did make my eyes come out like chapel hat pegs. Nevertheless, if I understand, just again want to check that I understand the process, that when complaints are using the statutory process for children's services, we've got these 3 stages, and that the kind of filter down that we see between stages 1 to 2 and 2 to 3 represents complaints actually being resolved at each of those stages, so they are dealt with. Does that mean that as far as a complaint, say a complaint is resolved at stage 1, does that mean that as far as the complainant is concerned, they have completed the complaints process as far as this council is concerned? Or is it that if they're not happy, that it's only resolved if they're content, and if they're not content, it moves on to stage 2 and then on to stage 3?
Yes, absolutely. So at any point, it's worth noting, at any point, any complainant can submit their complaint to the Ombudsman. They should go through the 3-stage process. However, it's a body that can be contacted at any point. What's more often likely to happen is the Ombudsman will deem the complaint premature and direct the complainant back to the local authority. And that may be that they've contacted me and said, we've received this, please could you let me know at what stage of the process this complaint is, and I will inform them of that. Now, we always inform all our complainants of their right to go to the Ombudsman at all of the stages, because if timescales lapse, or if they lose faith in the procedure, or they don't feel like we're following through with something, they do have a right to contact the Ombudsman at any point. So if they don't agree with a decision that's been made at stage 1, for example, so if one of their desired outcomes was something in particular that meant a manager had to make a decision and they didn't necessarily agree with the decision, they might not want to go through the complaints procedure for somebody else to say, we've had the conversation with the local authority and this was the decision and this was the rationale behind it. They do sometimes seek a different answer from the Ombudsman. So at any point they can go to the Ombudsman. If somebody's if their complaint is closed at stage 1 because they've not requested a stage 2, but say in a couple of months they come back and say, because of these circumstances, I'd like to escalate to stage 2, they have the right to do that, and we can't and wouldn't refuse them to do that. The timescales need to be reasonable. The statutory guidance is 20 working days that we ask complainants to come back to us. But of course, there are circumstances that mean a complainant can't come back to us within that timescale, and I wouldn't be completely unreasonable to say, no, we're not going to progress your complaint, go to the Ombudsman. We wouldn't do that.
Okay, that's helpful. However, the local government ombudsman's website seems to make it fairly clear that they won't consider a complaint until it has actually reached the end point of the local authority's own complaint handling process. So why do we give people information about referring to the Ombudsman when the Ombudsman's saying you've got to get to the end of the process?
Usually our complainants would ask for that information, and it's been a common theme that complainants will want to understand how long they have to go through the local authority's procedure before they can go to the Ombudsman, or can they just go to the Ombudsman, or can they have the Ombudsman's details. So me and my team would always provide them with that information, because it is their right to submit their complaint to the Ombudsman even if they are going through their procedure. So I wouldn't refuse them that information, although, as you say, it is readily available on the website anyway. If they're asking me for that information, I will provide it to them.
Okay, but do we also make it clear to them in terms of managing expectations that the Ombudsman would expect them to get to the end of our process before their complaint qualified to be considered?
Yes, sorry, I don't think I've been very clear there. Yes, we do manage expectations. So if a complaint hasn't gone through the process, we do make sure we are saying the Ombudsman will deem your complaint premature, but of course you can submit it and here are their details.
Okay, I think the clouds are parting a little bit, because I was looking at the funnel of complaints through stage 1 to stage 3 for the data you've provided for the last 12 months, and trying to equate that with, to begin with, the 56 eye-popping number, and now the 12 complaints that you say the Ombudsman received for the Children's Services area. So that kind of explains why we've got 5 complaints in there that the Ombudsman has said, no, you know, too early, you'll have to go back and finish the local authority process. But that was a significant step up in terms of the number of premature complaints that the Ombudsman sort of gave an opinion on, didn't rule on it obviously, but gave an opinion on, compared to previous years. Do we have any indication as to why, you know, in most years we've only had 1 complaint that has been deemed to be premature, and this year we had 5?
I don't know the exact reason, but interestingly, I've had a conversation with a family today, and they asked if they were 2 separate procedures. So I think it's about information sharing with our families and making sure that they understand that the local authority's complaints procedure, once that's exhausted, then you can go to the Ombudsman. It's not a case of they're 2 separate processes. So I think it's about educating and information sharing much more effectively, and perhaps that's something we could put on our website. But I think that might be why we're seeing an increase in premature complaints to the Ombudsman.
Okay, I think that might be helpful. Tina, did you want to come in?
If I could, thank you, Councillor Harvey. I think it goes back to the point a couple of people were making in terms of assurances, how confident those particular parents are feeling in the local authority's own processes. For all the independence that we do, it is still a local authority process. And I just wanted to draw your attention to the last page in Tilly's report, which just raises the concern that the national group of complaints managers have come together and you know, we've just discussed it for nearly an hour. It's a complicated process, isn't it? That you have to have assurances in, and even if you're assured in it, it's still complicated to know which bit you're allowed to do, which bit you're not, when are you seeking an outcome. So whilst we will review what we're doing, we will also keep a very close eye, and Tilly will be feeding into that national review to make complaints for children's services, whether it be corporate or statutory. That I think it will look at that issue in terms of what can be developed and what can be made a better fit for purpose through local authorities. So as we're developing, we'll keep an eye on what's developing there nationally as well, and make sure that we're in line.
Okay, thank you. Related to that, I welcome the offer that maybe we can improve the information that we've got on the web pages. As a general point, this council seems to really like to have lots of words on its web pages, and I think it's often really helpful to just have a little graphic or a flow diagram or something that allows people to see a picture, because not everybody is a words sort of a person. And linked to that as a comment, what provision do we have to provide assistance to families that may struggle for reasons of disability or language to actually engage with our complaints process, and where on earth would they go on our website to find that information out? Because it doesn't seem to be obviously available on our complaints pages.
So I will review the complaints pages. It's not something I would access, so it's something I will go into and have a look at. Regarding anybody with a disability, one thing we do ask is what reasonable adjustments do our complainants have. So that's in terms of communication. So there's no longer an expectation that a complaint needs to be submitted in a written format. They can phone us, they can come and meet with us, they can post their complaint, whatever suits them, and that conversation happens at the very early stages of when a complaint is, when we are contacted, whether that's with the service directly, they're contacted, or whether we are contacted. In terms of perhaps a language barrier, we work very closely with the Herefordshire Language Network, and would make sure that there was an interpreter available should we need to.
Okay, can I just, my last point is about a local government ombudsman complaint that was determined over the last 12 months that made a very similar finding to a complaint the year before, which was around us not actually handling the complaint through the correct process. And I'm just wondering whether, in terms of having some separation between the service area and the complaints handling process, whether there are, what the improvements are that have come about as a consequence of these two complaints being upheld by the local government ombudsman in fairly quick succession, within about 6 months of each other, 18 months of each other, saying, you know, you're not getting it right in terms of deciding which of the corporate or statutory process you're using, and what learning we've had and what we've done as a consequence of that to try and make sure that doesn't happen a third time.
Absolutely. I think it was indicated possibly by Tina earlier, the process itself is not the easiest to follow, and that is one of the reasons why the National Complaints Manager Group is looking at it and asking the government to actually review the process, and also who can and can't complain. The process was originally designed for children and young people to make complaints, not for families, for parents, and it's being utilised more by parents than children and young people at the moment, and that's not just our local authority, that's nationally as well, and that's part of the reason we're asking for a review of the process. If you are complaining on behalf of a child, it does state in the policy and in the guidance that you need to have a significant interest in the child or young person that you're complaining on behalf of, and be able to effectively reflect their voice to make sure their voice is being heard, because their voice should be at the centre of the complaint. As I said, I sit in corporate services, so my service is not directly involved with children's services. We don't have access to children's services systems. So for us to, if there's ever any question about which process to follow, those conversations I have with senior managers about this is the person making the complaint, do they have a significant interest, and are they able to positively reflect the voice of the child to make sure that the complaint is appropriate, and is it in the best interest of the child? And something that the Ombudsman are looking at the moment is do the children know that a complaint is being made on their behalf? So it's a continuous learning curve, and I think the feeling across majority of complaints managers is that it's a complex process, and Tina's highlighted that today. And hopefully the review will go through that we're requesting, and it will make it much easier to determine which process is followed. If you look at the guidance, it's not always very clear about who can and can't complain and what falls into each process. So unfortunately, sometimes mistakes are made, and I will hold myself accountable to that, as we have done with that particular case. I think what's important to remember is we had over 200 complaints last year, and a very small number was submitted to the Ombudsman, and of that small number, one was identified as being held through the process. So yes, in that particular case, there was fault, and that has been remedied, and we are seeking to resolve that particular case.
Okay, I mean that's good to hear, and I think generally as a committee, on not just in here today but on previous occasions, I think we all feel that complaints is a really important area, both as a bellwether, if you like, to try and get a sense of how we're doing on this improvement journey. And also as a way of accelerating our opportunity to improve by being able to take that learning and that feedback and embed it into the changes and improvements that we're making. And for me, I think, having sight of an annual report, whilst it's a useful opportunity to pause and reflect, a 1 year kind of peep at what's going on feels like it's not frequent enough, given the urgency to improve here and the pace at which we're looking to deliver an improvement journey. And I think I'd like to suggest that as a committee we have sight of the complaint pipeline and the information about the resolved complaints more frequently than an annual report, so that we can kind of use it as a temperature test and try and understand not just how well we're actually doing in processing complaints and integrating the learning, but also that volume question. And whilst we're still unclear as to whether we've got a lot more complaints because we've got a lot more unhappy people out there, or we've got a lot more complaints because we've got a better, easier to engage with process that families have growing confidence in, I think, again, it's really important, certainly for this committee, to be educated and informed on that so that we can do our job as scrutineers properly.
I think, having newly arrived in Herefordshire, we need to do some work with you as a committee on what it is that you want as a regular reporting, whether it be KPIs, whether it be information on complaints and compliments. And then it is for you then as a scrutiny committee to be able to build that into your programme. I appreciate it is for you to decide, if you want a quarterly. I wouldn't envisage that more than quarterly is appropriate at all, but a quarterly report. But it's whether or not you then, within your programme remit, have the time to do the deep dive and the session on complaints on a quarterly basis. But we are happy to add in a quarterly report on the data that we're receiving. That wouldn't be a problem at all.
I think if we can actually make that a recommendation, because it doesn't necessarily have to come to a committee meeting. It can be information that informs the committee, but if given that complaints is such an enormous area.
I suppose my only ask would be that if it comes to committee, it comes to committee is either as AOB for information only, or it comes as an agenda item, not as a for information only, and all committee members then can contact officers outside of scrutiny to ask for follow-up questions and activity. And I say that because I need to be realistic and mindful about what it is scrutiny are doing, what we need to keep in the public arena so that people can see those questions, and capacity in terms of us responding to those things. So very happy to provide it as information only, and then any questions that come up on those particular committee scrutiny days, very happy to look at it that way.
Okay, thank you. And if we can include in that recommendation that actually information regarding the local government ombudsman comes to the children, relevant to children's scrutiny, children's services comes to the children's scrutiny rather than audit and governance, so that we've got our sights on that as part of the our understanding of the complaints process. Right, we've got.
I'm sorry,
sorry.
I'm so sorry. Can I? I'm not sure on that particular ask. I think I need to leave that with Daniel to talk to information and governance about, in terms of that's a change of the process as I understand it here, for what goes to which committee.
Okay, we'll take that up with the monitoring officer.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of that. Okay, so I've got I had a hand up from Councillor David Davis, and then let me just get, and then Councillor Highfield, and then his is very quick, and then I'd quite like to just wrap this up, and then I'd like us to have a 5-minute break. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one, really, on the complaints process. I thought I had it all nailed down until we started this meeting. The statute process for children's services has a three-phase process, with the option then to go to ombudsman if the individual families are not satisfied with that particular outcome for whatever reason, which is fine. You said, Tina, earlier that you're looking at tweaking that process by changing stage 1 so that an individual, a person outside the normal social work team is going to come in and look at that complaint. I think that's fantastic. Are there other adaptations you intend to make to the process? Because you've got a fresh set of eyes on how you've done things in the past and achieved greatness, and how you're going to install that in Herefordshire. Can you sort of elaborate on that at all, please?
I suppose there were bits, as I say, and I'm sure some of this is already on other people's agendas for the developments, not just mine. But it is that initial independent person. It is the conversation with the person. I think that is something that is aspired to, but maybe it's not something that we are monitoring as closely as we need to make sure that we've got compliance with that. Have we developed the practice standard for that, so that you can expect that if I'm allocated to investigate a complaint, I will have that conversation with you at the beginning of that complaint to make sure that I can read what it is you've written, and we can have a very clear conversation around what the scope. The additional add for me is that we make sure that what it is you're seeking to achieve out of this is also recorded at that stage, so that we are, we're going through a process together, rather than us going through one and you going through another, and we get to the end and then you're very disappointed. What was the other things that I was thinking? The other part is the compliments, and making sure that we record those as part of that, and having that breakdown within service, which may exist, I've just not seen it yet, of the different areas that is where the complaints are coming from, so that we can really delve down to understand, is it a particular part of our process of delivery of children's services that parents or young people are finding particularly difficult. And then the other part would be, how do we make it even easier for young people, because they're not largely using the process. They want to do it differently. How can we make that happen? is part of hearing the voices of children and young people anyway.
Thanks for that. You mentioned earlier there was currently we're dealing with, or you're dealing with 4,000 children within the county. Would it be possible to get feedback from those 4,000 families? I mean, is that something that's potentially achievable, to get satisfaction or complaints coming back in as an independent, outside the sphere of the direct contact with those families, as in by letter or something? Are you happy with, a form that can be completed?
That's what we're going to develop as part of the quality assurance voice of the service user, of the parent, the carer, the child and the young person, is to go to them at opportune times throughout the process. So at the end of, I said, at any one time, over the year we've done 1,500 assessments. We want to go to the parent at the end of that assessment and say, we have now completed assessment. We've got a survey that we'd like you to fill in, which gives us the ability to collect data as well as free text for them to say, yes, I was happy with my assessment, the right people were involved, I was able to share my views, I got a copy, my views were reflected in it, those kinds of things at the end of an assessment, at the point of case closure. For children and young people, there are additional times at the point that they change placements, for example, if they're a child in care. So we've got different, we've planned different parts of the process, and for a child and young person, parents' journey through our services, where we can say, how was it for you? Tell us the difference, and then we can hopefully build the amount of voices that we're hearing.
Thank you. Councillor Highfield, your quick one?
It is very quick. As a bit of an advice for Tilly, you mentioned that you're going to have a look at improving some of the information available on the website. Now is the time to strike, because the county website is being updated and made better. I think I triggered that with the CO when I said, if you put CO in the search engine, you get 21 hits and none of them are you. So I think now would be the time to strike on that one.
And I think also that the annual report for complaints is dated 2020, so that's a good...
It is, and thank you for highlighting that. I followed that up this morning and it's got the right report on it now.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much. I think we've had a good discussion around that. What I would like to do is just have a look at the recommendations now that we've pulled together, and then have a 5-minute break, and then we'll move on to the Families Commission report. So thank you, Steve, for bearing with us, and thank you very much, Tilly, for the work that you've done on this. And yeah, we look forward to hearing more about how the process is improving. So, recommendations. Have you, Scrutiny Officer, have you managed to pick any up? I've made some notes.
Not really. I heard quite a few suggestions, and some of them struck me as actions more than anything. So if anybody who does have any recommendations they want to table in the first instance, I'd be very grateful to hear them.
Okay, just before we do that, if you can please, committee, also just have a quick think about your recommendations. Councillor Powell, I realise actually that we haven't given you the opportunity to speak about this, so perhaps you'd like to just come in as a conclusion to this item.
So thanks, Chair. So obviously you'll appreciate about a year ago I started to meet with a number of families. So this is an overall reflection of potential distance travelled, I think. The most significant issue is the need to rebuild trust and confidence in the service. That is the most significant issue. Some of the families I've met with, reflecting on the director's point about outcomes, it was clear at the start that we were never going to be able to achieve the desired outcome. But that didn't mean it wasn't important to sit and have a conversation and to listen to what individuals and what families were saying about their experience. That's been really important too, and we've absolutely made sure that those issues will be addressed through the current revised improvement plan. as well as meeting with families, I received a significant number of contacts, either by email or by phone call, where matters were being raised with me. And this is a statement. It's not to excuse what was happening, but it is a statement. At that particular time, the level of activity in the service was such that people were simply not being responded to in a timely manner. That was most often email or a phone call. That was the most significant complaint for me. And as over the period of time, as the total workload, accepting the services work with 4,000 children, young people and their families, over a period of time, that system has started to calm down. So the expectation, I've been talking to the director about this, the expectation is that our communication is more timely at the start, and it picks up on the point that Sam raised. That conversation at a much earlier stage in the process actually probably would avoid a complaint at all. We still have got a significant way to go. We've all heard that. We've all acknowledged that. There are a small number of families who I met who, over a period of time, have increased their confidence in the service such that they have stepped forward to become part of the improvement journey, to reflect on their experience, to be able to amend systems, forms, and indeed get engaged with advice and guidance to parents and carers who may well be about to go through a similar process, and to adjust the content of those. So 14 months on, I'm confident that we are having the right kind of conversations. I'm confident that we will get there, but the most significant issue for me is we absolutely need to make sure that we restore that confidence in children's services and the whole system, so that families will, be engaged at the start of the process in a different way, and B, be confident to use the complaints process if they feel that is the right thing for them to do.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Powell. What I'm suggesting now is that we actually break for a few minutes just to go through these recommendations, and then we'll come back with the recommendations. If anybody needs a comfort stop, please use the opportunity now. So if we can you confirm that the live streaming is Okay, thank you. So thank you for bearing with us while we work through those recommendations. Please, can we have the list of recommendations from the Scrutiny Officer, and then we'll vote on them en bloc.
Thank you, Chair. The recommendations of the committee are as follows: that Herefordshire Council review and revise the information on its website concerning complaints to include information on the local government and social care ombudsman process and information on where to seek assistance. For the Children and Young People Service to report to the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee on the demand, flow and timeliness of complaints. The report should include an analysis of those complaints and the ongoing development of the complaints process. That Scrutiny recognises the work undertaken in partnership with Leeds City Council around complaints and asks that consideration be given to having an independent professional investigate and document the complaint and desired outcome, understanding the demographics and protected characteristics of people making complaints, and ensuring that children's, young people's and families' views are incorporated in that review.
Thank you. Is everybody happy with those recommendations from that item? Councillor Harvey, are you voting yes?
No,
you're not.
I'm raising my hand to ask, while the meeting is live, why there is not a timescale associated with number 2 or a frequency.
I propose that it be 6 monthly, but let's listen to any counter arguments from Councillor Harvey.
Right. Okay. I think that there was some discrepancy about the timeliness of that report, but I do think that we actually decided between us that we would ask for that within 6 months to come to a scrutiny committee meeting. But can we add the 6 months, or I would really like us to move on to the next item and not get stuck on this. So if could we ask for that to come to scrutiny in 6 months' time, and if need be, we can look at our work programming to request to look at whether we review that. Would everybody be satisfied with that?
I'd be satisfied, yes, but I think Councillor Harvey has got something else to add to that, so I'd like to hear her point.
Well, the service reports quarterly through the corporate performance report, and I mean, it would be straightforward to include as part of what's reported on what's happening with complaints. My keenness is for there to be visibility of this, whether it comes formally to scrutiny or not, is less of an issue for me than that it is surfaced on a more regular basis than an annual report.
Right. So, sorry, can we, the scrutiny officer, please, can you help me with this so we can move on to the next item?
Absolutely, Chair. May I suggest then the following amendment to the second recommendation? I'll read this out again. I won't read all 3 recommendations out again. I'll just read the second one that's changed. So, for the Children and Young People Service to report to the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee within 6 months on the demand, flow and timeliness of complaints. The report should include an analysis of those complaints and the ongoing development of the complaints process. The first and third recommendations remain unchanged.
Okay, thank you. I think that covers that. We've asked for that within 6 months, and then when that comes, and we will bring that back to scrutiny, we can look at the again the constancy of the reports. If everybody's satisfied with that particular change, can you please raise your hand on that one? Thank you. And then if we can just agree to all of the recommendations en bloc. Thank you very much. Okay, if we can please move on to the next item, which is the report on the an update on the Families Commission, and I believe that the Director of Service will present this. Thank you.
I will, thank you. I would first just point out to everybody that Gail Hancock, who was an interim service director, has actually left the council. That was in a planned move. Actually, Gail's was employed on an interim basis as part of the improvement leadership team. Her contract was then extended for a further 3 months until the end of June, with some specific tasks around continued improvement and management of the corporate parenting service while the corporate parenting teams while we were moving into our next phase of the leadership and my appointment starting. So that's why Gail Hancock has left, but I've noted that she's the author of this report, and this was one of the tasks that was given to Gail because of her extensive involvement throughout the involvement with the Families Commission. As people will see, the report just gives a little bit of background at the beginning, just reminding people, I'm sure everybody knows around the table, but reminding that the Families Commission was initiated by the Herefordshire Children's Commissioner, Eleanor Brazil. The purpose of that was to give the families an opportunity to be heard by an independent panel and to share their experiences to inform the learning and improvement of the children's services. And the terms of reference were set out there in the report. At the conclusion of that report, the independent panel report posed 7 specific questions to the Council and the Hereford Safeguarding Partnership. And then in September 23, this Scrutiny Committee discussed that report in full and its findings. The Council of Herefordshire Children's Services have continued its work in terms of its improvement journey against those specific 7 questions. And this report sets out an update of actions that have been taken to give assurances that it didn't end and stop there in September 23, but a lot of work continued. You'll see there in the report that I refer on paragraph 13 that the new updated phase 2 of our Children's Services Improvement Plan has now been actually to the Improvement Board, and that was approved on the 17th of July. That report is coming, that plan, is coming to scrutiny in September and also going to Cabinet in September to make sure that all parties are aware. And I would just draw a couple of things of attention to people with regards to some of the updates within Gail's report that are going to now be incorporated into the improvement plan. One is the work that was in relation to early help, and specifically the My Community, the Community Safety Fund, and the My Family, My School, My Community. They are 2 very large grants that have been awarded, and we're commissioning some early help services and an early help review from People to make sure that we can develop our services and the streamlining of those services to get right help, right time, but that means at the earliest possibility and at the lowest threshold of possibility, services to support families and to support parents to be the best parents that they want to be. It references there on page 5 at the bottom the strategic review of People 2, which is again part of the locality model. That's incorporated in phase 2, which is about developing our services so that Herefordshire is a very big place, and it's important that there is a locality model so that there's partnerships within professionals, within local schools, within local early help services, local health services, but also within the local community and the local voluntary services. So within that threshold of early help through to children in need, through to child protection, we're all working closely together within the locality needs that reflect that particular community. The continuation of the delivery of the restorative practice, that is also picked up in the phase 2 plan, and that's important because Children's Services are now trained in that. We do want to make sure that any new staff to Children's Services are trained, that's in the plan, and that we are prepared as a Children's Service to deliver that training ourselves when lead leavers, their work plan should end in March next year, and we need to be in a position where we can make sure that we continue to deliver that restorative practice training to our staff. But the big piece of work for Leeds this year is to make sure that that's delivered through the partnership. And that's so that we, as a partnership of multi-agency professionals, when we're working with children, young people and families, they get a consistency of approach and language in the way that we work with families. Page 10, and I'm sorry these aren't bulleted, but page 10 picks up the engagement and partnership of children, young people and parents and carers. The engagement and participation framework through the partnership has been completed, but phase 2 of the plan picks that up in terms of both the quality assurance work and the development, which I sort of explained a little bit when we did the last item on complaints, and that is to make sure that we know ourselves well. For me, a good quality assurance framework has 3 key elements. One is the KPIs, the performance indicators that tell you how you're doing in managing demand and timeliness. They are indicators of quality in the basis that if you're not getting your assessments completed in time, or you're not seeing children frequently in the timescales that you should, then that is an indication to you of a concern. But KPIs in themselves do not tell you about the quality or the service user's experience. So the second element of a good quality assurance framework is audit activity, and we are developing further our audit activity so that we can understand where we are needing to improve particular areas of service, particular teams, particular individuals even, and have we're developing a comprehensive quality assurance programme in each of the areas across Children's Services, and also through the Safeguarding Board in terms of that multi-agency partnership. And then the third element, which is most important, is hearing from our children, our young people and our families about how they are now experiencing the current practice of Herefordshire Children's Services and its partnership. And as I described earlier, making sure that throughout the child's journey through our services, we are repeatedly asking in different ways, how was the experience for you? What difference did it make? Has it been a positive experience? Has it made a positive difference to your child? The ultimate aim being that actually the intervention of Children's Services has enabled you as a parent to care for your children well and safely. That's the ultimate aim for us as a service. We've also picked up through the partnership board the work with regards to domestic abuse. So there has been that review that's been completed, and the new training programme is taking place from September 24. That update and the impact and the outcome of that training will report to appropriately the domestic abuse forum within, which is a multi-agency forum within Herefordshire, because that's where that lives, and they're the ones that commission that training and need to be overviewing the evaluation and the outcome of that training. The restorative practice through the partnership I've said, and then the last part that's picked up in the phase 2 of the improvement plan is the complaints, which we've just had the item on, which is also within the phase 2 of the plan. So this is the update in terms of the detail of what's been happening under those 7 recommendations, and I've just outlined to you those ongoing pieces of work which have all been incorporated into phase 2 of the improvement plan.
Thank you, Tina. Yes, Sam, I realise you need to go. Thank you for attending, and sorry that we've overrun on this item. One of the again, just going back to the commissioner's sort of, comments on this was the questions was what would the safeguarding partnership do to ensure that complaints procedures in every agency across the partnership were accessible to families, work well, and that findings are recorded and acted on. So I think that the question for me I suppose is to you, Steve, and thank you for coming. How do we know? We know that agencies attending were able to provide assurance that this was the case. However, securing specific examples from every agency on how findings from complaints are acted upon will need to form part of the follow-up, which is again this audit challenge session that Tina's talking about. So the partnership has now linked agency complaints processes to the partnership website to support easier access to these procedures. Can you just sort of explain some of the how, if somebody wanted to make a complaint about a health service that they've experienced as a through as a young person or a family, where are we likely to find that? And would it be a good idea for that access, for there to be some sort of portal on the partnership webpage that provides people with access to those different partner complaints procedures, or is that not necessary?
Thank you for the question. Dealing with the last part first, we have actually put that on the website now, on the Herefordshire Safeguarding Children Partnership website. So if you go on, there's information there, safeguarding information. There is a tile saying want to make a complaint, and you go through and it's got listed, rather than us having the complaints processes themselves on the website. There's probation service, there's Wye Valley Trust, there's the police, there's Children's Social Care. You click through and that then takes you through to their website where they can access the complaints procedure. So that's dealt with, I think, quite simply. What we have done is within the audit process, we talk about Section 11 audit, Section 11 Children's Act 2004, which puts a responsibility on partnerships to ensure that individual agencies have robust child safeguarding practices in place. They complete an audit, they respond to that audit, and as mentioned in the report, the independent scrutineer, Kevin Crompton, has then conducted check and challenge with each of those audit responders to probe, okay, then you've identified an area that requires improvement or is inadequate. What have you got in place? What are you doing about it? How are you action planning it? And how will you know when that's resolved? Part of that check and challenge was around the complaints process, and a question that agencies and perhaps unsurprisingly, I think all agencies struggled with the question, well, okay, give me an example of where a complaint has changed practice at a sort of strategic level. And we're asking, as I say, representatives from the probation service and the youth justice service and police. And they need time for that to answer that question. That's fair enough. There's the completion of the Section 11 audit. There's then the check and challenge follow-up, which we've done, and then there's their response, which then goes onto the audit portal as to how they've actually addressed those issues. What we've asked is within that response, they provide examples of exactly that. So we can. It's described as a learning culture within your complaints process, isn't it? So there is that learning culture within partners across the partnership.
Thank you. So we should be able, from the audits, we should be able to see what sort of learning has been gathered from that process. Is that right?
That's correct, and they can be really simple examples of learning. And I'm talking with some experience here, having been head of a complaints department for police for 3 years myself. They can be really simple things, like, for example, the person didn't ask me about this. Well, it can be a simple change of a form, and to make sure that that's not missed. But actually, it's demonstrating that complaints are heard and being listened to, and then being acted upon. It shows that learning culture, if you like, for the organisation.
Okay. The other question that I have, and I'm hoping then that other committee members will come in with questions, but it is around the issue of restorative practice. So I know that we've heard that it's been rolled out within council staff. Obviously, the changing to relational practice and restorative practice is a massive change in culture, especially for different organisations that have been used to working in a different way. I think the concern that I have is that this is only now being rolled out to the partnership, and I understand that the partnership probably hasn't had the capacity to deal with this, but it's about the pace of change and that need for a shift in culture, and also bearing in mind working together 2023, the requirement, basically restorative practice underpins that. So I'm just wondering how we're going to ensure that different partners actually take this on board at speed, not sort of evolving over the next 5 years. Thank you, Tina.
So I think it's just important that I say on behalf of the partnership, actually, that they are desperate to have this training. It is the delay for them receiving this training has not been the responsibility of the partners. So they're ready very quickly to get their staff presented for the training dates. It's just been a capacity issue in terms of rolling it out within children's services. Lots of turnover, as you know, of staff and agency staff. And the social workers and social care workers are already leading that approach and talking to partners about what they're doing, how they're doing it, why they're coming up with the assessments that they're coming up with and the plans that they're coming up with. So it is filtering through in terms of the partnership. It's not that the partners don't know anything, but that formal attendance at the training, of course, is really important, and that is the priority for Leeds to start that programme now.
I think it's also, we need to be careful when we talk about complaints processes and then restorative practice in a similar conversation, because restorative practice we're talking about is restorative practice working with families, but restorative practice is also very much language used within the complaints process or any complaints process, about rather than going through a what can turn out to be a very drawn out process to arrive at a situation that nobody's happy with, you try and deal with it as soon as the complaint is made, as quickly as you can, and deliver what's required. So we just need to be careful, what we're talking about from a restorative practice perspective when we're talking about complaints, and we're talking about working with families and children.
So sorry, I'm just a bit unclear. To me, restorative practice is restorative practice. So I understand. Are you saying that they mean two different things? If you're talking about complaints, it's something different to underlying how agencies work with people?
They are the same thing, aren't they? It's restorative and a restorative practice. But what I'm saying is, if we talk specifically around complaints and the partnership and how we're approaching restorative practice from a complaints perspective, the partnership itself doesn't have a complaints process, and no Safeguarding Children partnership will. What we are looking to do, and talking directly now in relation to complaints, is to ensure that agencies that are dealing with complaints by children, families and young people about the way they're being treated, they take a restorative approach wherever possible, but from a child protection, child safeguarding, working with children and families, restorative practice, it's much broader than that, isn't it? We're not just talking about complaints processes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hayfield.
Yeah, thanks very much. This is really interesting. Page 3 of the progress report lists the 7 items where we're being questioned how is, and then there are explanations about what we're doing about those items. I'd just like to refer to item, the 5th one of those, which is how will Herefordshire Children's Services support social workers to establish and maintain blah, blah, blah. In other words, what we're looking at there is how will we help the social workers perform well, do their job well. And one of the things that concerns me, now I run across them quite a lot because I'm on the fostering panel, and I see quite a lot of social workers who so far have all impressed me. They've been very, very impressive. But what concerns me is that when we talk about complaints, we've got attitude or we've got the wrong procedure. sometimes they're overworked, and they have in the past been overworked and have simply not been able to do their job, even though they are good social workers, and that's sometimes resulted in a complaint. How are we doing with workload to meet these expectations that we have on our social workers? Because everything we've talked about depends on their interface with the children and with the families involved. What's the workload like now?
So you're right. You know, the work around the workforce is what we would call good conditions for practice. So we need to make sure that all of our social workers and our social care workers actually have got the conditions that enable them to deliver good practice. And there's a range of things in those conditions. One is manageable caseloads, and that is most commonly talked about. But there are other things also in there like access to your managers, regular supervision, good practice standards that are meaningful and easy to follow so that you know what's expected of you when you're given X, Y, Z task. An IT system that is easy to use so that you can access it and it doesn't become a bureaucratic process. So there is a range of things in terms of conditions of service that need to be in place to make sure workers can practice the good practice that they want to practice. In terms of caseloads, we've got some good areas for caseloads, particularly in our children in care teams at the moment. They're quite stable. We've recently, in the last couple of months, had some challenges in our assessment teams and that front door assessment team. Assessments at any one time. If that one worker either goes off sick or leaves, then that's 20 children that you have to then reallocate to a different social worker. That's terrible for the children, but it's also terrible for the workforce who then have to pick up those assessments. And as I said earlier, you know, that volume of assessments and the turnover is phenomenal. So we have to keep a very close eye on that. We've got some great staff, I agree with you. I've seen some really, really good staff and managers as well already. And when we see the changes in the caseloads going up, we need to react so that we can manage them. And that means doing things like we're doing some work around with our performance partners in IT so that the managers get information and manageable information pushed out to them so that they can see workloads and workflow much more easy rather than having to go and find all of that for themselves all the time. All of those are important parts of making good conditions for social work practice and pay. Pay is the other issue. So it's a whole package. The learning and development offer. All of those things are important for our workforce to get them stable. We're still very heavily reliant upon agency workers. And I think agency social workers have a very important place to play in children's services. There will always be people who are on maternity leave. There will be sadly some people who are on sick, long-term sick, or even for a few weeks. And we need our agency staff to be able to step in and fill those gaps so that workload that I was talking about can be picked up easily by somebody. But we also have too many short-term turnover of agency workers. And if we get the conditions of practice right, the caseloads, the access to IT, the IT equipment that you've got, the office environment, the ability in the locality model, as I was saying earlier, to be able to work closely with your schools, to step down cases when you finish working with the family, rather than there's no one to step it down to, so you'll keep holding it. The transition points between teams, all of those things are important for us to be what we would call the employer of choice. And so I think we've made some good roads to that, but there's definitely more that we want to continue to do.
Thanks very much. I'm very happy that you're very clear on what needs to be done. Perhaps you haven't been here long enough to be able to see whether it is all being done yet, and probably you're still working on some of it. Maybe we can hear more about that later to meet those requirements, because I know some of the social workers have been stressed by the pressure that's on them, and if it's a bad worker, so be it, but if it's a good worker who can't do their job properly because of the pressure, exactly. That's very unfortunate. And they get very upset about it as well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Councillor Proctor.
I think, following this thought through, so one thing I'm interested in is the kind of the impact of cultural norms. So, and in particular, I'm thinking within partnerships, we've had professionals from lots of different agencies who have become used to child protection working in a particular way here, which I think we all agree has not been very the way we want it to work. And a lot of work has gone in within Herefordshire Council to train social workers in a particular form of practice, which hasn't happened in partners yet. And so I guess I'm interested in, because the report references the fact that partners have not always been supportive of this restorative approach. So do we know what the cultural friction has been? And do we actually know, we train people, but how can we tell whether it's kind of in the real work of social work and in working with partners, how can we tell that the restorative approaches are actually being taken forward? And assuming we get this if partners adopt this training, we would expect to see, therefore, positive improvements. So how will we be able to see those positive changes?
So whether you train your partners at the same time as you train your social workers is a debatable point. If you train your partners at the same time that you train your social workers and your social care staff, it takes longer to train your social care staff. So you kind of have to make a decision, and there are pros and cons. And we decided here to train our social workforce. I don't think, from what I've seen, and I've had a lot of conversations, there is any resistance at all to the partners working in a restorative way. I think what has got a little bit confused is when we've talked about managing risk. And that's an important part of working in a restorative way, making sure that we work with a family to their strengths, and we help them do what they need to do to care for their own children well. That doesn't take away the duty through law on children's services, on their duty to act to protect. And I think this there is some confusion around restorative balanced with management of risk. And I think that will come out in a helpful way when we start delivering the training to our partners. And we will, of course, have some social care representatives within that partnership training, so that we kind of move forward learning together, not just all in isolation. And it will be a multi-agency learning together, not in isolation. But I do want to assure you that I haven't picked up any resistance from our partners to want to work in a restorative way. When we're talking about restorative, we're also talking about all of the things that the think family, engagement of the wider family, strength-based approaches, all of those things our partners are very much bought into. And I've worked with, for the last 6 years, with these very same partners, because many of them we share between Worcestershire, where I've just come from, and Herefordshire. Police, health, we share a number of those partners. And although they're different schools, I can certainly know that in Worcestershire, the schools are very, very good. And I line manage actually here the head of service for early help, who is very experienced here in Herefordshire, very close engagement and working with schools, and it is very clear that the schools are very, very positive about their early help, about wanting to support families as well. So I don't think we're going to have an issue with engaging everybody working in a restorative way. It's just getting that balance right between when we're talking about being restorative and managing risks and acting on our duty to protect at the same time.
And
it was a long
how,
question,
yeah,
so you might give
sorry.
me another bit to it.
How do we know, how will we know and be able to tell that practice is changing within partnerships?
So two things I guess I would say. One is that, as I said earlier, asking children, young people and parents about how they feel the partnership is working together. So, for example, one of the things we want to do at the end of child protection conferences or at the end of a child in need intervention is talk to a family and say, how was the experience for you, but also not just on a local authority perspective, but how was the experience for you on a multi-agency? Did you feel that the partners worked together? In fact, one of the questions I've literally just done this morning is a question do you think the right professionals were involved in working with you and your family? And if not, which professionals do you think weren't involved? So making sure that we're asking those sorts of questions so that here and now, case by case, parents and young people can feed back to us. And the other one is looking at our KPI data. And as I said, that KPI can give you some headline around quality. So repeat assessments, repeat child protection plans, they're the key ones that show you whether your service and what you've achieved is something that families can step down and sustain, or whether if they keep coming back into the system for more assessments or more child protection plans or even repeat care, there will always be some, but you'd expect small numbers, and they're KPIs that we'll be measuring and we continue to measure ourselves on. So that's another kind of indicator in terms of how are we working as a partnership together, but importantly, how are we working as a partnership and making sure that we're making a positive difference to a family that they can then go on and sustain.
I think, sorry, Councillor Davis, did you want to make a reflection on that? Is that?
I just wanted to ask a question about the age of early help for children. What do you call early?
Early help.
What age?
Early help is pre-birth up to 18.
Yeah, and is this for dyslexia as well? If you've got a child in school who's suffering from dyslexia, at what age will they be interviewed or assessed? Sorry,
it would not. It would depend. It would depend on the child, and that would be something that would manage through the school and through the health professional. That's not something we'd expect to come to the door of children's social services.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think what Councillor Proctor was trying to get to was actually sort of how restorative practice is not a hugely tangible thing, and so it's about how that we would collate that information in terms of reflecting whether restorative practice is embedded in how services operate in Herefordshire. So I think is that what you were trying to get to? I mean, obviously KPIs reflect, there are various things, but specifically restorative practice. Is that what you were?
Yes, though I thought
you got
the
a good
director
answer.
answered
Okay.
it quite well.
One of the questions for me is about the think family approach. So what is the think family approach? I only ever see it when I look at the Families Commission reports. I never see it as anything that's actually sort of becoming embedded in.
So the think family approach is both. It's new in that we've given it a label. It's not new in terms of developing practice that's been happening probably in recent years or so. And think family is that if I'm working with you and you're the mum of the children and you've got two children and you've also got a brother that also lives in your household, or you've got your mother who lives 2 streets away. For me, working with you, it's about my ability to make sure that I recognise what's happening in your life. Not only what's happening for you as a parent with your 2 children and talking to them and seeing and building those relationships and working on whatever challenges your 2 teenage sons have got. You're the 2 teenage sons in this scenario. It's also about me understanding for you what care needs you might have for your elderly mother. And how that impacts on your ability to both parent your children and also be an independent woman in your own right. And it's also about maybe you've got your brother who's also living with you, but he might have a mental health issue or a substance misuse issue. And so it's about me making sure that when I see you, I think family, I think your network, and I then link in with the services. It's not about me being the social worker for a children's social worker and me being a social worker for the brother and the grandma. It's about me making sure that I can say, actually, do you know who I need to link you in with? And I know about a local service that can help you as a carer for your mother, or I know that the local substance misuse service that can help your brother with his substance misuse. That's what Think Family is. We are developing now some practice standards and some checklists to help our practitioners do the very thing that you were talking about, Councillor Highfield, around making sure that the workers have got the guidance to help them understand what Think Family is, what things should I be thinking about. So some checklists, some procedures, and the locality working that I talked about is a way and a model of working that really supports that. Because if I'm working in a locality in one area of Hereford, one area of Herefordshire can be very different to another, and the services there's some things that they're saying, but they can be very different in terms of what's available in the community, how that community works. And so if I'm working in a locality model, I can get very close to my schools, to what's happening in the universal services, to what's happening in the parish councils, so that when I want to connect your brother to a support service for lonely men, or your teenager into a sport group, I've got that information, and my early help service that's working locality can help me as the social worker make contact with those different services. That's what Think Family is about, and that's how we will work it with families.
Thank you. Can I just ask, is that going to be embedded across the partnership? That is a partnership objective, is it? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Councillor Liz Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think I'd like to take a bit of a step back and look at this as an entire report. I really welcomed the work that was done on the Families Commission. I know that families weren't entirely happy that it ticked all the boxes for them, but for those that did engage, I think the work that was done, well, obviously we haven't had visibility of the work that was done with and for them as individual families, but I think the questions, the higher level questions to the council and to the partnership that came out as a consequence of that work are really important. And so I welcome this as an update on that in terms of where we're at with it. But I really am struggling with the report as it's set out. And I've had to really have a bit of a think about what my problem is with it. And I think the only way that the way I've lighted on to try and describe it is it's a little bit like being presented with a whole bunch of ingredients that could make a cake or a pie, depending on how they're put together and the order in which you do that and the quantities of each ingredient that you use. And it kind of feels, reading this, it's been written by somebody who, is deeply knowledgeable and embedded in social care practice. But to somebody who is not, it's quite difficult to link all the different things that are grouped under each question heading and kind of intuit from those how they answer the question. So, and I'll give an example. Well, you were just talking about Think Family. And the question itself doesn't really explain why Think Family is important and why it will make a difference to the way that we do things. But then neither do any of the sections underneath it. And the question preceding the one on Think Family is asking, how will Herefordshire Children's Services support social workers to establish and maintain the trust and confidence of parents that's the focus of the question, and families to enable their participation in planning to keep their children safe and promote their well-being. And it sort of jumps straight into talking about the Children's Services Directorate leadership team, and then the work that's going on to do with workforce and stabilising the workforce. And I just think for the lay reader and families out there who might be really interested to understand how these questions are being addressed, just saying something about, well, you know, in order to provide support to social workers to maintain trust and confidence with parents and families, there needs to be a stable relationship. There needs to be a relationship built up between those families, their children, and the social care team. And we can't deliver that relationship whilst we have a workforce in perpetual churn. And therefore, di-da. And it just, it's close. It's so close, frustratingly close. But for me, there's an awful lot of bits that have been organised under these question headings, but I'm not getting as a sense of that how far forward we are in answering those questions, how far away we are from delivering real material improvements in the example I gave, helping parents to participate in the planning that's necessary to keep their children safe and to promote their children's well-being. And I just kind of want to know that, you know, and I think as a committee we all want to know that. This is an update, a progress update. How much progress have we made? We're doing lots of things, but how much progress have we actually made? And I'm struggling to get a sense of that as a consequence of the way this report is laid out. I have no doubt that progress is being made in lots of different ways, but I'm struggling to get the sense of it. So I mean, it's more of a comment than a question.
So can I just interrupt just to say that actually it is 5 minutes past 5, so this meeting has actually now gone beyond 3 hours. Are all members happy to continue beyond the 3-hour limit? Okay, thank you.
Officers are.
Chair, I would suggest perhaps you indicate a time and stick to that. So say
Okay,
agree a
well if we can agree, if we can conclude by 5:30, I think that if that's acceptable to everybody else.
15 minutes, we've got other meetings to go to, or personally speaking.
Well, you might have to do that, and what we will probably have to do is to defer the work programme item, as we have a draft work programme, and the committee can actually comment on that.
Just to comment, we have people there that we promised to meet after this meeting, so we need to move on as quickly as
Yes,
we
I
can.
realise, but I realise that actually we have this. Okay, we will try and be as quick as possible, and be finished by 5:30. But I'm sure that those people members of public are also interested to sort of see this item concluded to its best ability. Yes, a question. Thank you.
Yes. Can I just describe something about how the fostering panel works? I'll give you an example. We may get somebody comes along and they need approval to change their approval needs to be changed. So let's say instead of just having young kids, they can have a child up to 10, just for example. So that's the only thing that we are legally allowed to look at that meeting. But what will have happened is that there will be reports, there'll be a whole file. We'll probably get talked to by the children's social worker and the fostering social worker, and the actual one of the fostering parents will almost always be there. And this story will have been looked at by a team, and I can tell you, I can't tell you how impressed I am with those people that are on the fostering panel. They are wise, experienced, and caring people. And very few children that come under our ambit are looked at as carefully in other circumstances. That fostering panel is quite unique in that a group of very wise and intelligent people look at it. And we sometimes come across things where something that's outside of our remit appears to be wrong. Something is going wrong, but it's not within the legal thing that we can act upon. So we put a recommendation in that goes through some channel or other up here. I'm not comfortable that those recommendations are paid sufficient attention to, bearing in mind that they come from such a knowledgeable and wise group who've looked at the whole story of that particular case. So what I'm asking is a request, not a question. Please, can you make sure that the recommendations of the fostering panel are given a great deal of weight, because they're like gold dust? That would be my recommendation.
Yes, I can make sure. I'm not sure whether you're talking case specific to the child or generally wider service development, or both.
It's
But
both.
either
It's
way,
both. It comes to
either
both.
way, yeah, I will check where those recommendations go, and how that is that's kind of looped back to the panel. If it's general service development, I would imagine that we're able to feed back to you as a panel on recommendations that you've made. But if it's case specific for a child, that would be more difficult to do, because you won't, as you know, have that child back on the agenda, and you won't have the ability to do that. But you're getting the assurance that where that goes and that that's incorporated into that child's case. Yes, I can make sure you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Right, I've got a question. It's about, I've got a couple of questions actually. One is looking at a child-friendly Herefordshire. What does a child-friendly Herefordshire look like? How are we going to get the views of residents in Herefordshire to make sure that they sort of feed into that vision? And how far are we in the work progressing a child-friendly Herefordshire?
For me, a child-friendly Herefordshire looks like, if I come to live in Hereford and I'm a parent, I can see the importance of my child in everything that's around, in the policies, in the procedures of the council, in the where I go, whether there's a park, whether there's leisure facilities. What can I do with my child? Why would I want to come and live as a family in Herefordshire? And obviously there's benefits for any county to make sure that you're encouraging families to come. So is there employment for adults? Is there an infrastructure network where I can get around? All of those things. Families want to live in prosperous, nice places, just like everybody else. How do we engage them? I mean, for me, that's what I look to you as the politicians to do. You represent your members of public. So what does child-friendly Herefordshire look like to you? And what are they telling you it looks like? And what can you do to make sure that we are developing a child-friendly Herefordshire? As a county council, we can make sure that, and I can make sure as the Director of Children's Services, that when we're developing policies, I'm shouting up for the voice of the child. How is that going to impact on children? What does that look like for children? But definitely, for me, it's about coming to you, the councillors, the parishes as well, and getting your feedback and your support on making Herefordshire a child-friendly place.
Okay, so on our 26th of November agenda, we have the voice of young people in Herefordshire on that agenda, and I suggest that we bring this item of a child-friendly Herefordshire to the discussions that we have around that, and potentially also a sort of out of committee sort of briefing and how we can actually
for
influence
an
policies.
Easy term, I don't know if any of you have been or are members of the corporate parenting panel. But if you think of the corporate parenting panel and, you know, what they do as leaders to make sure that we're really good corporate parentings, and they use their positions, their knowledge, their power, their influence to make sure that we're good corporate parents. Well, a child-friendly Herefordshire is that for all children. It does not just looked after children, but for all children.
Councillor Powell, you're an elected member. Do you have a view on this?
So I do, but one of your questions was by what date. So we've been talking to Leeds as our improvement partner. They already have child-friendly status, and they've offered, and we've taken up on in a couple of different meetings, to come and talk to us. So I'm not sure. So the director's described a range of things. I'm not sure it's a destination, if that makes sense. It's an ongoing piece of work. But just building on a couple of points that the director's made. So in terms of the corporate ambassador piece, corporate parenting piece, we have promoted the opportunity for all elected members to identify what skills, experience, background they have, so that that would enable matching for children looked after and care leavers to achieve their ambitions. So if I give, so a simple example, and you've heard this before, one of our care leavers wanted to engage in a particular sport. I happen to be very connected to that sport. We made that happen. Child-friendly Herefordshire, for me, means if a 12-year-old is at a bus stop waiting for the last bus home and hasn't got money, the bus driver says, get on the bus for free, and has a conversation about why they might be out at 12 years of age on the last bus, and is able to provide some information back into the system, not children's services, the system about whether that child might be at risk. So it becomes part of the psyche and consciousness. And Leeds use this particular example. The symbol for child-friendly Leeds is an orange thumb, like that. And they, when they present, they show a particular picture of a corporate flower bed in the city centre, which has been planted by council workers with an orange thumb. They weren't asked to do it. It was just in the psyche of child-friendly. Like I say, it isn't a destination. It's a concept. It's a whole way of working, a whole way to exist. And whilst the council has a significant part to play in it, of course, we'd look to all partners and all communities to embrace the concept.
Okay, thank you. The other question I had, and you know, just to reflect on what you've said, if basically that this is a whole community thing. This question relates to my family, my school, my community, which is one of the projects that has been funded. It's likely to have a huge impact in quite a short time, and as I understand, the funding is a year's worth of funding. And I just wondered, is there, first of all, is there scope in building up capacity through training parents as community connectors through their school networks? Is that something that's been explored? But also, how is the learning from all of those funded projects which have come through the Police and Crime Commissioner funding and the additional funding that went into schools? How is that being collated at the moment, so that we can actually try and ensure that there is more funding specifically targeted at areas of success for the next financial year, so that the work that's been built up is actually continued through our communities and not just suddenly abandoned because there's no funding for it?
I think that's really important and it's definitely top of my radar. It is great that we've got these additional services, but I've absolutely got one eye on what happens when the funding for those services ends. And it is not a simple answer that the council will take over for future funding for those services. So in terms of the evaluation of those projects, I've actually taken over the role of the Senior Responsible Officer, and my Head of Service for Early Help, Nikki Turvey, and we're working really closely with those providers to make sure that throughout the delivery of those projects, we are understanding the added value, the evaluations, but the added value that those projects are bringing to those families, so that, as you say, we can understand what works well and what didn't work well. And then as part of that, we will be wanting to work of, well, where does future funding come for growth or alternative services that can do that way of working or whatever it is, can take over what it is that's been in place. And as you say, you know, whether that's looking for more grants, opportunities, whether that's looking at developing our community resource, our parents' strengths to help themselves, or existing projects that have got ongoing funding to develop or even change what they're doing, the focus or the way that they're working based on the evaluations that we've done around what is working. All of those things are in scope for me about options to look at how we make sure there is no cliff edge to the families that have been worked with through those projects.
And thank you, Councillor Davis. Yeah, and I would just like to recommend actually that is embraced as a whole partnership approach, so that partners are also looking at how they can support that. And because we know that funding is going to be an issue, that there's no doubt about it. So how we're actually using our community resources to deliver that through our schools primarily. Councillor Highfield, did you have
Yes,
a
I wanted to make
comment?
a point on that, and it's an area where I believe the council has to some degree failed. There was funding provided for youth clubs to have fund some part-time staff. That approval for that and the information that it was available only came through recently, and it is, as of a couple of days ago, it's still not yet been paid, and we're nearly into August. They needed to hire the staff for the school holidays. It has to be spent, I think, by a certain deadline. If we're going to get funding for something like that, then it needs to be processed promptly so that it can be used. And that's not the only time where funding has been, let's say, really awkward. There's stuff that came through for Talk Community that was not offered in a way that made maximum use of it. Councillor Powell may know something about that. Yeah, no, and the youth club concerned is in Kington. I believe Councillor Terry James knows about this. So that's not the only example. There was another one last year where money that was provided for an outing. It's hard enough to get funding, but when it came through, it was too late to be used properly. So we need to, if we're lucky enough to get funding, we need to process it quickly and get it out to the people who need it.
Okay. Does anybody else have any comments on this report? I think it's sort of primarily, and it sort of comes back to what Councillor Harvey said, was that every family that participated in the Families Commission expressed their desire to ensure that their painful personal experiences should be used to improve services for everyone, to ensure that nobody else should ever have to go through what they had gone through again. Do you feel that this is being achieved? I mean, are we getting there, or is there still a lot of work to be done on this?
There is clearly more work to do. I think that's well publicised. I think I'm pleased with the phase 2 of the plan. I think it focuses more, but I'm also pleased that what we'll be doing is being able to have a refocused improvement board with the quality assurance framework that I've talked about, with the 3 different angles, which give you a triangulation around the KPIs, the audit and the service user feedback about whether or not we are improving our services. That's what we'll do going forward. We'll have it overseen by the improvement board, and it's part of the scrutiny programme to have those regular updates reports.
Thank you. Steve, I'm conscious that you've sat sort of through our whole meeting and we haven't brought you in. Is there anything that you want to add as a sort of, from as the business manager of the partnership that you feel is important for us to sort of take on board?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity. And the short answer is no, I don't think so. Thank you. I think we've covered everything we need to during this item, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to come along and attend. So thank you.
Okay, and Councillor Powell, anything you want to sort of conclude on that Family Commission report?
Similarly, no, I think we've debated it. I think, importantly, the experience of families both who spoke to the Commission, but also those other families who I've spoken to additionally, that experience to achieve that goal, that we don't want it to happen to other families in the future. As Tina has reflected, it is absolutely embedded in the detail of the phase 2 elements of the improvement plan, and that's where delivery, governance and accountability needs to sit.
Okay, thank you. And at the next scrutiny meeting, we will actually be looking at elements of that improvement plan through the eyes of quality assurance and auditing. So this is obviously an ongoing discussion, and it's not going to sort of conclude here. Does anybody have any, and thank you very much for coming and for bearing with us. Does anybody have any recommendations other than the one that I have asked for, that specific work be undertaken on the resources that have come? Sorry, could you read it out for me, please?
Forgive me, Chair, I've just taken a note of what you've written there, but I think you need to sort of finish it off there. I think at the moment I have the Herefordshire Council provide analysis of funding provided through the Police and Crime Commissioner and My Family, My School, My Community to demonstrate that funding and resources are focused on delivering
basically longer, more opportunities for families and communities, and to ensure continued delivery of projects that have already begun. To ensure continued delivery of projects that have already begun. Is that?
One moment.
Can you help me, please? Tina?
Yeah, I just think that's very specific in terms of the specific projects that are already there, and anybody reading that will think actually what that means is that Scrutiny are looking for, can you continue to fund these projects that have already run? So I would just be cautious of, I don't think that is what you're saying. What you're saying is to make sure that we've got a sustainability around once we've understood what works well and we've evaluated those projects, that we have a plan for how we can build that into the early help and support that's offered throughout Herefordshire.
Okay.
early help and support. How about then?
So thank you. If you can say analysis of those projects can help develop the work, sustained work on early help throughout Herefordshire.
Okay. The Herefordshire Council provide analysis of funding provided through the Police and Crime Commissioner, My Family, My School, My Community to demonstrate that funding and resources are focused on delivering sustained early help and support for families and communities. Okay. I will.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, could I propose that we have a recommendation that the next update report makes a clearer link between the initiatives that are underway and the Commission questions that have been posed to the Council and to the partnership?
I'm actually really concerned that there is no plan to have a further update report around specific around the Families Commission. I take the feedback that you said around this particular report in terms of it pulling things together. I'm pleased that you said it was close, but I think whatever report we do, it's always going to meet some people's needs and not other people's needs. These are specific activities under those headings that have been taken place. The Families Commission has been completed, it's ended. The Phase 2 plan and the reporting through that improvement board and the improvement board progress reports to Scrutiny and that QA framework is where you will monitor the ongoing improvement and how it's experienced by children and young people, not, as you say, a kind of an update report specifically to this Families Commission report.
Okay, could I be clear then? Are these 7, 8 questions that were posed as a consequence of the Commission at an end in terms of being used as a framework to explain how we're delivering against the objectives set out in those questions?
Yes. What we've got in the improvement plan that you'll see is, which hasn't been sufficiently, I don't think, in your previous improvement plans, is the measures of success. The improvement plan phase 2 brings us back to what did Ofsted say we weren't doing well, and then added to that, how will we know when we are doing those things well, and that brings us right back to focus on what was Ofsted said and how will we know when we're doing well, and that's that QA compilation that I told you about, and you've got each of those against the Ofsted recommendations that I'll be able to talk you through when I bring the phase 2 plan to Scrutiny.
So will there be some clear link transitioning between this question set and how the work continues within your phase 2 plan?
So as I set out when I was saying, there's a number of things within this that are ongoing that are that link that have been incorporated into the phase 2 plan.
Councillor Hayfield, did you want to ask?
Yeah, could I make a recommendation that from the question I said before, that where funding is available to contribute to a child-friendly Herefordshire, that funding be processed and handed out as soon as is possible.
Okay, to avoid the delay, basically, in getting the project delivered. For a child-friendly Herefordshire. Where funding is available for a child-friendly Herefordshire. Towards.
It be processed and distributed quickly.
Funding available to support development of a child-friendly Herefordshire is distributed as rapidly as possible.
Okay. Can I just ask for one sort of clarification? The link between the Families Commission is very clearly made in that stage 2 of the improvement plan. Is that so? There is a reflection in there that this has been part of the process.
Yeah, the outstanding actions that are still ongoing have not been completed, form part of that phase 2 improvement plan.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay, any other questions? I realise that we are now at 5:30. Do you want to run through these recommendations? Okay.
Okay, there are 2 recommendations of the committee. They are as follows. that Herefordshire Council provide analysis of funding provided through the Police and Crime Commissioner and My Family, My School, My Community to demonstrate that funding and resources are focused on delivering sustained early help and support for families and communities. And the funding available to support development of a child-friendly Herefordshire is distributed as rapidly as possible.
Thank you. Everybody happy with those? Can we vote on them en bloc? Okay. Thank you. So I think we're going to defer the item on the work programme. It's an ongoing piece of work, and we can update ourselves on that. Yeah, we can just make sure. But basically, the next meeting of the Children's Scrutiny is on. Can you please remind me of the date? Is in September. 17th of September, and we will be looking at the QA and audits in relation to the improvement plan that's coming through. So thank you very much for everybody's attendance. Appreciate your patience and information, and I'll close the meeting. Can we make sure that the live stream is off, please?